Yo, what's up everyone? It's Harry vs X, and today we're checking out, what if Anubis and Bastet found Harry at age 4 in cupboard and raised as immortal god of death and rebirth. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Scales. The cupboard smelled like dust and old shoes and something that had been forgotten so thoroughly it had stopped trying to be remembered. Harry Potter was 4 years old, and he had learned, with the particular efficiency of small children raised in unkind houses, exactly how much space he was allowed to take up. Not much. The cot they'd given him was narrow enough that he had to sleep curled like a question mark, knees tucked to his chest, one arm folded under his chin. He'd grown so accustomed to it that he did it even when he didn't have to, pulled himself small on instinct, made himself quiet, made himself nothing much at all. Outside the cupboard, the Dursley house was settling into its nightly routine. Vernon's television, too loud, always too loud, filtered through the door slats in blue flickers. Petunia was washing dishes with the kind of aggressive thoroughness that suggested she was imagining they were something else entirely. Dudley had been put to bed an hour ago and was already snoring in the room directly above, which was roughly the size of the entire downstairs compared to what Harry had. Harry didn't think about it much. He thought about spiders, mostly. There were 3 that lived in the upper corner of his cupboard. He'd named them Gerald, Mop, and Susan. Susan was his favorite because she never ran away when he reached out a finger toward her web. He was watching Susan rearrange the left side of her web when the air in the cupboard changed. Not the temperature. The temperature actually dropped, not dramatically. Not the sharp cold of a window left open in November, but a deep, settling cold, the kind you feel in your back molars and the base of your spine. The kind that exists at the bottom of very old places. The air pressure shifted, too, like the moment before a storm, when everything holds its breath. The 3 spiders went absolutely still. Harry went still too. Not from fear, or not entirely. It was more that everything in him recognized, at some animal level below thought, that something was present that hadn't been present before. Something that made the cupboard feel very small indeed. Then a voice said, "Bastet." It was the kind of voice that didn't echo, it absorbed. Low, deliberate, carrying the weight of something that had spoken words of judgment in halls that made this entire house look like a matchbox. And a second voice said, "I see him, I see him. I already see him. Look at him, Anubis, he's so small." This voice was warm the way fire is warm. It crackled. It moved. It filled the spaces the first voice left behind with something that felt, inexplicably, like sunlight through shutters. The door to the cupboard opened. Harry had been expecting Vernon, who opened the door in the evening sometimes to say things Harry was not going to repeat, or Petunia, who did not open the door much because she didn't like to look at him directly. He had not been expecting what was actually there. The first figure crouched in the doorway, and even crouching, it was enormous, or at least it was in a way that didn't entirely correspond to the physical dimensions of the hallway. It had the head of a jackal. Black as deep water, sleek-eared, with eyes that were gold, not the yellow gold of a dog's eyes but true gold, the metal itself, ancient coin seen at the bottom of a well. It wore a long kilt of linen, immaculate white, and around its wrists were bands of hammered gold. In one hand it held a staff. The other hand rested on one knee as it crouched, and that hand was long-fingered and human and absolutely still. The eyes looked at Harry with the unhurried, assessing attention of something that had looked at 10,000 million souls and knew, always knew, exactly what it was looking at. The second figure was crowding into the doorway beside the first, and she was a woman, or something that chose the shape of a woman the way a river chooses a channel, because it suits the terrain. She had the head of a cat. Sleek and tawny, with ears that tilted forward with absolute focus, and eyes that were a brilliant, living green, slit-pupilled and luminous. She wore gold and bright linen, and the impression of warmth was so strong that the temperature in the cupboard went up 3 degrees just from her proximity. She was looking at Harry with an expression that managed to be simultaneously fierce and devastated. "Oh," she said softly. "Just that." Like she'd been expecting to find a problem and found something infinitely worse. Harry looked at them both. He looked at the jackal head. He looked at the cat head. He looked at the gold, and the linen, and the impossible fact of their presence in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He said, "Gerald isn't scared of you." The cat woman blinked. "I'm sorry. My spider Gerald." Harry pointed up at the corner. "He's not scared. He stayed in his web. He usually runs when the door opens." The jackal-headed figure, Anubis, the other one had called him, turned its golden eyes upward to the corner where Gerald sat in his web, utterly composed. There was a long pause. Then Anubis looked back at Harry, and something shifted in those gold eyes. Something that was almost, not amusement, exactly, but its very ancient precursor. "A wise spider," he said. "I think so too," Harry said. Behind Anubis, the Catwoman made a sound. It might have been a laugh that she swallowed before it fully formed. "What's your name?" she asked, leaning further into the doorway, cat ears angled forward. Her whole body communicated attention, focus, the absolute prioritization of Harry over everything else in the known universe. "Harry," he said. "Potter. The Dursleys call me boy mostly, but Aunt Petunia says my name is Harry when she fills out forms." Something moved across both their faces at that. Anubis went very still in the way that had nothing to do with calm. Bastet made a small sound low in her throat that wasn't quite a word. "Harry Potter," Anubis said, and his voice had dropped, not quieter, but deeper, the way the bottom of the ocean is deeper than the top. He was looking at the scar on Harry's forehead now. He had not looked at it before this moment, which meant he had been deliberately looking at everything else first. "Do you know what you have on your forehead?" Harry reached up and touched it. He'd had the scar for as long as he could remember. "The Dursleys never talked about it. Aunt Petunia says I got it in the car crash that killed my parents," he said. "She says it's ugly." Anubis was silent for a moment. "It is not from a car crash," he said. Not gently. Factually. With the precision of someone who does not believe in comfortable lies, but whose voice held something careful in it anyway. "It is from something that attempted to end your life and failed." Harry considered this. "Oh," he said. Then, after a moment, "Is that why I can do funny things sometimes? When the Dursleys get loud?" Bastet made the sound again, the swallowed laugh, and looked at Anubis. "I like him," she said, in a tone that suggested this had already been decided before she'd even asked his name. "You like everyone initially," Anubis said, not looking away from Harry. "I like him specifically," Bastet said, which was apparently a distinction. She turned back to Harry and crouched down properly, bringing herself to his level, and her green eyes moved over his face with an intensity that felt like being catalogued, not unkindly, but thoroughly. She looked at the hollows under his eyes. The shadows. The too sharp line of his collarbones visible above his collar. The way he sat, pulled in, the architecture of a child who had learned to occupy the least possible space. Her tail, which Harry noticed for the first time, and which seemed to be an actual tail, long and tawny and tufted at the end, struck the doorframe once, sharply. "We're taking him," she said. "Yes," Anubis said. "We are." Harry looked between them. "Where?" "Somewhere considerably better than this," Bastet said. "Are you asking permission?" Harry said. This time Anubis did something with his face that was, definitively, an almost smile. "Would you like to be asked?" Harry thought about the cot. He thought about Susan and Gerald and Mop. He thought about the television that was always too loud and the way the lock on the outside of the cupboard door clicked sometimes at night, just to remind him it was there. He thought about the way Dudley had, last week, sat on him. "You're not going to lock me in a cupboard, are you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Anubis said. And there was something in the way he said it, not a reassurance, but a statement of absolute, immovable fact, that hit Harry somewhere behind his sternum with an almost physical force. "Okay," Harry said. "Can Susan come too?" Bastet looked up at the spider, who had resumed her web arrangement with perfect composure. "Yes," she said gravely. "Susan may absolutely come." Harry collected Susan in a small matchbox he'd been saving for exactly no reason he could have previously explained and decided that this was probably fine. Getting out of number 4 was, in Harry's memory of it, both completely normal and entirely impossible. He remembered walking down the hall. He remembered the television light still flickering under the sitting room door and Petunia's dishes still clinking in the kitchen. He remembered Anubis opening the front door, without touching it, and the night air coming in, carrying the smell of cut grass and something else underneath it, something old and mineral and vast, like a desert wind from a desert that did not exist on any map of England. He did not remember crossing the threshold. He remembered being outside, and then he remembered being somewhere else, and the transition between the two was a thing his 4-year-old mind simply declined to file. What he did remember, perfectly, with the crystalline completeness that attaches to moments that reshape everything, was the Duat opening before him. There was a river. Wide and dark and absolutely still, the way water is still when it has never, in the entirety of its existence, been disturbed. The sky above it was not a sky, or it was a sky the way a cathedral ceiling is a sky, vast and intentional and lit from within by light that didn't come from any visible source. Stars moved in it, but they moved too deliberately to be natural stars, tracing slow paths with the gravity of purpose. The air was warm and dry and smelled of natron and something floral, kiffy, though Harry wouldn't learn the name of it until later. On the banks of the river, enormous things moved in the shadows. Harry could see the shapes of them, ibis heads, hawk heads, the heavy-shouldered suggestion of something massive and seated and very, very old. He could hear, distantly, the sound of scales. Not the scales of something living, the deliberate, resonant click of the weighing kind, enormous and perfectly calibrated, balancing something that mattered. He held his matchbox with Susan in it very carefully. Bastet crouched beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her. "What do you think?" she asked. Harry looked out at the river. He looked at the moving stars. He looked at the shadows where great things walked with the unhurried confidence of the permanent. He felt the deep, settling cold from the cupboard here too, but it was different now, not the cold of confinement, but the cold of depth. Of enormity. The cold of something that contained more than any warm surface could hold. "It's very big," he said. "It is," Bastet agreed. "Are there more spiders here?" "Quite possibly." "Okay," Harry said, for the second time that night, and meant it even more than the first. Anubis watched Bastet settle the boy in one of the smaller preparation rooms off the Hall of Two Truths and let out a breath that was not quite a sigh but occupied the same emotional territory. He held the feather of Ma'at in one hand. He had not consciously summoned it, it had simply appeared, as it always did when something arrived in the Duat that required assessment. The feather was white and weightless and older than the concept of weight. He turned it once in his fingers. The child's soul was not normal. He had known that from the moment he'd felt it, felt the peculiarity of it, the impossible doubled resonance, a living soul that should not be alive because something else had tried to end it and the death had gone wrong, catastrophically wrong, in a way that had left a shard of broken, corrupted soul attached. Like a splinter driven deep, lodged against bone. He had seen what Horcruxes were, once before, in another era, another continent, another magical tradition that had pursued the same terrible solution to the same terrible fear. He recognized the texture of the thing, the desperate, grasping wrongness of a soul fragment that refused the scales and refused the river and refused everything the Duat represented, because it had been ripped away by violence and forced to persist by nothing but its creator's pathological refusal to accept what every living thing must eventually accept. He set the feather down. Bastet appeared in the doorway. She had stayed with the boy until he slept, which had taken approximately 4 minutes because Harry Potter, it turned out, could sleep anywhere that didn't have a lock on the outside of the door. "The shard," Anubis said. "I know," Bastet said. She crossed the room and leaned against the wall beside him, arms folded, tail low. She had the look she got when she was thinking about something that made her angry but that she was managing carefully. "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing yet," Anubis said. "It is not harming him. Not directly. It will be dealt with in time, but removing it now, carelessly, would hurt him. Would risk the part of the soul that is actually his," Anubis said precisely. "They are not simply adjacent. They have been growing in proximity for 4 years. Separation requires care." He paused. Significant care. Bastet was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What is he, Anubis?" "Past the obvious, past the magical bloodline and the death curse and the Horcrux. What is he, actually?" Anubis was quiet for long enough that the distant sound of the scales filled the space between his words and hers. "He is a child who survived something no mortal should survive," he said finally. "He is a soul that the scales were prepared to weigh, that arrived here and then left again." He turned the feather once more. "He has been here before, Bastet." In the moment the curse hit him. His soul reached the threshold, and then returned. Most mortals do not remember that crossing. They return to their lives and carry the echo of it in some deep place they never examine. "But?" Bastet said, because there was clearly a but. "But he remembers the crossing," Anubis said. "Not consciously. Not in any way he has words for. But his soul remembers standing at the threshold between living and not living and making a choice, and that memory is in him the way the shape of a riverbed is in a river. He does not think about it. He does not need to. It simply shapes the way he moves." Bastet looked in the direction of the room where Harry slept with his matchbox of spider. "We're keeping him," she said. "Not a question." "Yes," Anubis said. "I'm going to teach him to fight," she said. "Obviously. And to run, and to climb, and to read people, and to, Bastet." "What?" "He is 4 years old. He needs to eat regularly and sleep somewhere that doesn't have a lock on the outside first," Anubis said, with the particular, weary patience of someone who had been having variations of this argument for several millennia. "We have time." Bastet smiled, and it was the smile she saved for things that were not quite threats. "We have all the time in the world," she said. "And I intend to use it." The next 3 days, if days could be said to operate with any meaningful regularity in the Duat, were characterized primarily by Harry eating everything put in front of him, sleeping in 8-hour stretches, and asking questions at a rate that would have exhausted a lesser deity. "Why is the river dark? Why do the stars move like that? Why does everything smell like that flower? What is that building? Can I go in that building? What are those people doing? Are they dead? If they're dead, why are they walking around? Why is that one so sad? Can you make him not sad? Does Gerald count as dead or alive since he's a spider and spiders have different things? Why does the feather glow sometimes? Can I touch it? Why not? Why does your staff make that sound? Is it a weapon? Will you teach me how to use it?" Why is, Anubis, to his credit, answered approximately 80% of the questions. The remaining 20 he deflected on grounds of developmental readiness, which Harry received with a level of skepticism impressive in someone who still had to stand on his toes to see over most tables. The household, such as it was, the Duat not precisely operating as a household in any conventional sense, settled into a rhythm within the first month. Harry ate with them in the great hall, seated between them at a table that could comfortably accommodate 30 and was set with 2 adult portions and 1 small one that was still enormous relative to what Harry was used to. Bastet noticed, the 3rd night, that Harry was eating everything on his plate with a focused, systematic intensity that had nothing to do with enjoyment and everything to do with not knowing when the next opportunity would come. She added more to his plate without comment. He ate that too. She did not comment on this either. But the next morning, a bowl of fruit appeared on a low shelf in Harry's room, persimmons and figs and dates and something golden that didn't have an English name, and the shelf stayed stocked from that day forward. Anubis found Harry 3 weeks in standing at the entrance to the Hall of Two Truths, nose pressed as close to the great double doors as he dared, peering through the gap at the scales inside. The scales were active, they were always active, souls presenting themselves in a continuous, solemn procession, and the light from the hall fell on Harry's face in gold and shadow, and his green eyes tracked the proceedings with the calm, careful attention of someone watching something they intend to understand. Anubis stood behind him and watched him watch. After a while, Harry said, without turning around, "The one just now." He was lying. Anubis said nothing. When he talked about his life, Harry continued. He said he'd been good. But when the feather, he paused. He didn't have the vocabulary yet, but he was reaching for it. When the feather did the thing. It went down. The heavy sighed. Yes, Anubis said. So he wasn't actually good, Harry said. There was no judgment in his voice. Just, the observation. The cataloging. He just thought he was. Anubis moved to stand beside him, looking through the gap at the scales, which were already receiving the next soul. There is a difference, he said, between a man who lies to the scales and a man who lies to himself so thoroughly that he no longer knows the difference. The scales, however, always know. Which was he? Which do you think? Harry thought about it for a moment. Then, the second one. He wasn't trying to trick it. He really thought he was good. Yes, Anubis said. He was not a wicked man. He was an unexamined one. He moved through his life performing the actions of a decent person and never looked closely enough at his reasons for doing so. That's sadder than if he'd been bad on purpose, Harry said. Anubis looked down at him. The boy was still watching the scales with those green eyes that had already seen the threshold once and carried the memory of it in their depths. Yes, Anubis said. It is. Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can I come in and watch properly?" Not yet, Anubis said. Why? Because watching the Hall of Two Truths is not a thing to be done casually. When you watch it with all your attention and all your understanding. You are not yet ready. Harry turned and looked up at him with the direct, evaluating gaze that he'd already developed, the one that assessed whether an answer was a real answer or a deflection. After a moment, he apparently decided it was real, because he nodded. Okay, he said. When? When you can stand in the presence of any soul, Anubis said, and tell me, without error, whether its heart will weigh heavier than the feather. Harry turned this over. How will I know when I can do that? You'll know, Anubis said. Harry looked back through the doors. A new soul was approaching the scales, tentative, ancient. I'm going to practice, he said. I know, Anubis said. His divine name came 6 months in. It wasn't a ceremony, exactly, or it was, but it didn't feel like one, the way the most important things rarely do. Anubis had been teaching Harry the rudiments of soul reading, the way certain energies clung to the recently deceased, the way the weight of a life manifested not in the body but in the subtle light around the soul, the gradations and textures of it. Harry had turned out to have an extraordinary natural sensitivity to it, which was not surprising given that he had already crossed the threshold once, but was still remarkable. He felt it the way other children felt heat, automatically, instinctively, without having to work for the sensation. They were on the banks of the dark river when Anubis said, simply, "You need a name for this place." "I have a name," Harry said. He was sitting cross-legged on the bank, trailing one finger in the water, watching the small cold light that moved in the depths, the distant passing of souls downstream. "You have a name for the mortal world," Anubis said. "In this place, you need one that belongs here." Harry looked up at him. "Do you get to name me?" "No," Anubis said. "You choose." Harry sat with this for a while. The dark river moved. The moving stars above did their slow, purposeful tracing. Somewhere in the shadows behind them, Bastet was teaching herself a new weapon, they could hear the periodic, sharp sounds of it, and once, an extremely colorful phrase in Demotic that Harry had already been expressly forbidden from repeating. Haruank, Harry said finally. Anubis was still. Where did you hear that name? I read it, Harry said. In the scrolls in the East Room. It means something like, living Horus, right? Or Horus who lives. He paused. I know I'm not Horus. I'm not saying I'm him. But Horus, he died and came back, right? Or kind of died. And his eye, the Wedjat, it's about healing and, he struggled with the shape of it. It felt right. For what I am. What happened to me? Anubis looked at him for a long time. Then he said, Haruank. And the name in his mouth, in the language of the dead that predated every other language, had weight. It settled. It fit. Is it okay? Harry asked. It is, Anubis said, entirely appropriate. From behind them, Bastet's voice carried across the dark water, I heard that and it's perfect and I'm not crying, that's just Nile dampness. We are nowhere near the Nile, Anubis said. Duat dampness, then, don't ruin this moment for me. Harry grinned, really grinned, the full-face version, which he was still getting accustomed to, and turned back to the river. The Dursley situation required, as Anubis had put it with the understatement of a being who had existed since before the concept of understatement was invented, a dressing. He went back to Privet Drive 11 days after they'd left. Not to negotiate. He did not negotiate. He went because there were forms that needed completing in the mortal world, documents that governed a child's existence in that thin, noisy layer of reality that mortals had built over the actual structure of things, and because he wanted to look at the woman who had kept a child in a cupboard and tell her, clearly and without ambiguity, what the consequences of any future interference would be. Petunia Dursley opened the door, looked at Anubis in his mortal form, tall, lean, dark-skinned, with golden eyes and a kind of presence that made rooms feel smaller, and began to formulate the specific expression she used for unexpected visitors she planned to dismiss. She did not get through the formulation. Anubis looked at her, and his golden eyes did the thing they sometimes did, the thing where they showed, just briefly, the depth behind them, the vast accumulated weight of every soul he had ever weighed, the patience of something that had been standing at the threshold between living and not living since before the Nile was a river. Petunia went still. You had a child in your care, Anubis said. You chose not to care for him. He is no longer your concern. He paused, and the pause had the weight of tectonic plates settling. If you speak of him to anyone who represents the people who placed him with you, to anyone who might consider retrieval, you will find that the retrieval is not possible, and that the attempt to make it so will be something you will spend the remainder of your life regretting. Petunia made a sound. He is well, Anubis added, because he was not cruel. He is fed. He will be educated. He will not spend another night in a cupboard. A pause. Is there anything you wish to say? Petunia said, in a very small voice, is the thing in him, he is protected, Anubis said. From everything that might harm him. Is there anything else? She closed her mouth. She shook her head. Anubis nodded once, turned, and left. Behind him, Petunia Dursley stood in her doorway in the warm evening light and felt, for the first time in 4 years, the full weight of something she had chosen not to think about. She thought about it now. The thinking did not make her feel good. Dumbledore found out, of course. Dumbledore always found out. He was extraordinarily good at finding out things that other people's carefully constructed privacy was intended to prevent, which was a quality he considered a virtue and which most people, on reflection, would not have agreed with. He found out via a monitoring charm he had placed on the blood wards at Privet Drive, not on Harry specifically, because that would have been improper, but on the structural integrity of the protections, which he checked quarterly the way other people checked the weather. In the autumn of 1984, the wards had stopped registering Harry's presence. He went to Privet Drive. He spoke to Petunia, who told him nothing. He looked at her face and understood that nothing was being guarded with a fear that was not his to question. He tried several tracking charms, the kind he would have used to locate any missing magical child, and found them sliding off something they could not adhere to, something that did not operate in the mortal magical spectrum, that existed outside the jurisdiction of any ministry, any Hogwarts registry, any device that monitored magical Britons young. He sat in his office for a long time afterward. The sorting hat, unprompted, said from its shelf, "Well." "Quite," said Dumbledore. "He's not dead," the hat said, which was one of the advantages of a magical artifact that had spent 5 centuries reading human minds. It was very good at identifying the core of a concern. "He doesn't feel dead. He feels." It considered. "Elsewhere." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "You're going to need to be patient," the hat said. Dumbledore placed his fingers together and looked at the window where the evening was going purple and gold over the Hogwarts grounds. Somewhere out there, not in Britain, not in any territory he had the capacity to reach, a 4-year-old boy with a lightning bolt scar was, apparently, elsewhere. "I have always been patient," Dumbledore said, which was true in the way that many true things are also incomplete. The hat made the sound it made when it thought someone was fooling themselves. Dumbledore chose not to hear it. The last thing Harry remembered about that first day, years later, when he was something other than 4 years old and had accumulated the weight of training and judgment and a childhood that bore no resemblance to the one that had been initially assigned to him, was Susan the Spider. He'd let her out of the matchbox on the first morning in the Duat, when he'd woken up in the preparation room and found the bowl of fruit on the low shelf and the sound of distant scales providing a steady, rhythmic background to the vast and glittering new world outside. He'd opened the matchbox carefully and let her walk out onto his finger, and she'd sat there for a moment, perfectly still, and then she'd moved to the wall beside the shelf and begun, with calm and absolute competence, to build a web. He'd watched her for a while. Then he'd eaten a fig and looked out the high narrow window at the moving stars above the dark river, and felt something settle in him that he didn't have a name for yet, that he would eventually understand was simply the sensation of being somewhere he was allowed to stay. He had not, at 4 years old, cried about anything for a very long time. He had learned that crying made the Dursleys annoyed in a way that made things worse. He did not cry now, either. He ate his fig, and watched his spider build her web, and breathed in the old warm air of the place that was going to be his home, and let the something without a name settle all the way down to the bottom of him. The Duat stretched enormous and ancient around him, full of moving stars and dark water and great things that walked with the unhurried confidence of the permanent. Harry Potter, Haruank, though he didn't have the name yet, pulled his knees to his chest out of habit, and then, slowly, deliberately, let them fall open. He took up the space. Chapter 2, A Childhood in the Underworld. The first time Harry saw a soul get eaten, he was 7 years old and had been specifically told to stay in the East Corridor. He had stayed in the East Corridor for approximately 4 minutes before his feet, operating on independent initiative, had carried him through the side arch, down the obsidian steps, and into the upper gallery of the Hall of Two Truths, where he'd pressed himself flat against the carved wall and watched with wide eyes as Amit, crocodile head, lion shoulders, hippopotamus haunches, the assembled worst of 3 apex predators stitched together into something that moved with horrible fluid. Grace lunged forward and took what the scales had declared forfeit. It was not, visually, the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen. The Duat was not short on visually disturbing things. But there was something about the sound, a sound he could not describe then and could not describe later, the sound of a soul ceasing, finally and completely and without appeal, that hit him somewhere very specific, like a finger pressed hard against a bruise he hadn't known was there. He stood in the gallery and stared. Amit settled back. The scales reset. The next soul was already approaching, barefoot and blinking, the way they always arrived. "I told you East Corridor," Anubis said, directly behind him. Harry didn't jump. He'd stopped jumping at Anubis appearing silently behind him around age 6. "I know," he said. "And yet. I wanted to see." "You were not ready to see." Harry turned around to look at him. "I think I was, though," he said. "I'm not upset." Anubis looked at him with those gold eyes that saw everything, always, and had never once lied to Harry about what they found. After a moment he said, "You are not upset now. What you are now is processing." Harry considered this. "Is there a difference?" "The difference," Anubis said, moving past him to lean against the gallery railing, arms folded, watching the hall below with the proprietary calm of someone in their own home, "is that upset is a weather event. Processing is structural. One passes. The other changes you." He looked at Harry sidelong. "You will feel it tonight, when you are trying to sleep. Something that you don't have a word for yet." Harry leaned on the railing beside him. Below, the scales tipped, the soul was light, feather-light, practically floating, and then the soul moved on and the light around it was something that Harry's chest had learned to recognize as the afterlife's equivalent of yes, yes, this way, well done. He breathed out slowly. "What word will I eventually have for it?" "Grief," Anubis said. "Not for the souls who are forfeit, they have made their choices, and the scales are not cruel, they simply do not lie. But grief for the fact that they had the chance to choose differently and didn't know it, or knew it and couldn't." He paused. "Grief is the appropriate response to irreversibility." Harry was quiet for a while. Below them, the hall moved in its endless, measured rhythm. "Are there souls who almost get eaten but don't?" "Yes." "How?" "They arrive here and the scales tip against them," Anubis said, "and then something happens that does not happen often. They look at their own hearts. Not the way the man in the doorway looked, the unexamined man, remember him? Not a performance of understanding. The real thing. And the scales, not because I instruct them to, not because the heart has been reformed, it is too late for that, but because the scales, ultimately, measure truth, and the truth in that moment is genuine." He straightened. "It changes nothing about the outcome. The scales have measured the life as it was lived. But it changes something about the soul." He picked up his staff, which had been propped against the wall, and started down the gallery stairs. "Come. You missed your reading lesson." Harry followed, turning back once to look at the hall. "Anubis," he said. "Yes. Do you feel grief? For them?" Anubis descended 2 more steps before he answered. "Yes," he said. "Every time." He said it the way he said most things, factually, without dressing it up, and then he kept walking. Harry followed. He thought about this for the rest of the day, and then, just as Anubis had predicted, he thought about it that night in the particular way that meant something was rebuilding itself inside him around a new piece of information. He cried a little, quietly, in the way that was not about the Dursleys and not about anything the way crying had used to be, small and defensive and pointless. This was different. This was the crying that made room for something larger. He felt better in the morning. By the time Harry was 8, he had read more of the Duat scrolls than most of Anubis's own scribes. Not because he was instructed to, the scrolls were simply there, accessible, lining the enormous library off the main hall in their thousands, tied in linen and labeled in hieratics that he'd learned at roughly the same time he'd learned English letters, so that neither felt like a foreign language and both felt like home. He had also, by 8, developed what Bastet called the look and Anubis called unnerving perceptiveness, and Harry himself didn't have a name for because it felt completely normal from the inside. The look was this: he would meet someone, a soul passing through, a visiting deity, occasionally a mortal magician who died with enough unresolved business to bring them to specific corners of the Duat, and within a few minutes he would have an understanding of them that had nothing to do with what they'd said and everything to do with the quality of light around them, the texture of the energy they carried, the particular shape of the truths they were or weren't living. He did not always say what he saw. Anubis had been teaching him, with characteristic patience, the difference between perceiving and announcing. Just because you can see something does not mean that speaking it serves any purpose beyond demonstrating that you can see it, he'd said. That is showing off, not wisdom. Showing off is for Thoth on days when he's in a mood. Harry had asked what Thoth was in a mood about, and Anubis had said knowledge, generally in the tone of someone who had been answering that specific question for 5,000 years. But Bastet noticed the look, and Bastet, who had her own extraordinary ability to read people, different from Harry's death sense, more intuitive, more immediate, built on a lifetime of watching living things rather than souls, Bastet began, deliberately, to train it. "Tell me about him," she said one afternoon, jerking her chin at a soul who'd arrived in the outer hall and was waiting to be processed. Bastet and Harry were sitting on the steps of the secondary antechamber sharing a plate of honeyed dates. They did this frequently. It was one of Harry's favorite things about existing, the casual proximity of it, the ordinariness. Harry looked at the soul. Male, middle-aged, carrying the specific stillness of the recently dead who don't quite know it yet. He was kind, Harry said. Not naturally. He worked at it. There's something in the way the light sits on him, like he chose it, every time, even when it was hard. He tilted his head. He's worried about his daughter. What else? He worked with his hands. Carpenter, maybe. There's a particular texture around people who've spent years making things. He ate a date. He was good at his work. He took pride in it without being vain about it. That's rarer than you'd think. Bastet looked at him sideways. You said he worked at being kind. What was he working against? Harry looked more carefully. Anger, he said after a moment. Something happened to him when he was young. It left him with a quick temper. He spent his whole life putting a hand on that temper's shoulder and making it sit down. And he was mostly successful. Harry was quiet for a moment. He'll be fine, he said, with the simple certainty of someone who has stood at the threshold himself. His heart's not light as a feather, but it's close. It's the heart of someone who tried. Bastet ate a date and said nothing for a moment. Then, that's better than last month. What was wrong with last month? You were reading the light and missing the texture underneath. You've got both now. They have to work together. She stretched, tail moving in a slow arc. When you can do that in under a minute without the date as a prop, the date isn't a prop, I'm genuinely eating it. Without the thinking pause, automatically, like breathing, then we move to living people. Harry looked at her sharply. Living people? Eventually you're going to be in the mortal world, Bastet said, the first time she'd said it so plainly. You're not staying here forever, Harry. This is your home, but it is not your only world. She looked at him steadily with those brilliant green eyes. The ability to read souls doesn't stop being useful just because the soul is currently in a body. You'll need it there more than you need it here, because here, the scales do the final accounting. In the living world, there are no scales. Just you and your judgment. Harry thought about this. When do I go? Not yet, Bastet said. When you're ready. Anubis says that too. Because it's true, she said. And before you ask, you'll know when you're ready because you'll stop asking when you're ready and start asking why you're not there yet. That's the transition. Harry filed this away. He had a mental shelf. It was not a metaphorical shelf, he could actually see it in his mind, running along a wall in a room that had become, over years, very well organized, where he kept the things that needed time to be understood. He put the mortal world on it. It had been there for a while, actually. He looked at it sometimes. The shelf was getting crowded around it. The combat training started properly when Harry was 9, though he'd been absorbing the fundamentals since he was 6 purely through proximity. Bastet fought every day. She fought the way other people breathed, continuously, without particularly thinking about it, using whatever was available. She'd sparred with visiting gods who left the Duat looking thoughtful about their choices. She'd trained Harry's peripheral vision without telling him that was what she was doing, simply by moving through his space with the particular quality of attention that requires a response. The formal training was different. The formal training involved the courtyard off the north wing, flat stone, good footing, the sound of the river close enough to keep the air cool, and it involved pain, the instructive kind, and it involved Bastet saying things that were simultaneously deeply encouraging and absolutely merciless. Again, she said, for approximately the 40th time. Harry got up off the ground, brushed stone dust off his elbows, and went again. He was not learning magic. Not yet. The magical education was Anubis's domain, slower, more deliberate, built around understanding before application. What Bastet was teaching was not magic but the thing that makes magic meaningful, the ability to be in your body, fully, in a moment of crisis. The ability to think while everything is moving. The ability to take a hit, process it as information rather than disaster, and keep going. Harry was, Bastet admitted to Anubis later, terrifyingly good at the third part. He took hits with a composure that was partly his natural disposition and partly, she suspected, a legacy of the Duat, of having grown up in a place where the permanent reality of loss was not hidden behind comfort but presented honestly, so that the boy had built his emotional architecture around it instead of pretending it wasn't there. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He hit the ground, assessed, got up. The staff, she called. He'd been working with a short staff, wood, mortal, nothing special, because she wanted him to learn without relying on anything divine. He caught it from the air where she'd thrown it without looking, tucked and rolled and came up moving. She hit him twice in the next exchange, and he got her once, not where he was aiming. He'd been aiming for her shoulder and clipped her arm, but the adjustment had been good. He'd adapted mid-movement when she shifted her weight. Better, she said, catching his strike on her forearm and redirecting. Stop committing before you know where I've decided to be. You keep changing your mind, Harry said, and his voice was completely level despite the fact that he was working hard, which she considered a sign of excellent breathing discipline. People always change their minds, she said. In every kind of fight. Plan for the person in front of you, not the person you expected. She swept his legs and he went down again, but he rolled with it this time and was up in one motion. She nodded. Good. That was good. Harry rolled his shoulders and looked at her with those eyes that were permanently, indelibly older than his face. 9 years old and already reading her stance like he was reading a scroll. Can I ask something? Ask. Why are you teaching me to fight people? The souls here don't fight. And anything that would actually be a threat to us here, he gestured broadly at the Duat, which contained, at any given moment, a frankly absurd amount of divine power. I'm not going to win by hitting it with a stick. Bastet smiled. She sat down on the courtyard wall and let the tail go easy and relaxed. The stick isn't the point, she said. I'm not teaching you to fight people. I'm teaching you that your body is reliable. That your mind works under pressure. That you don't fold when something goes wrong. She tilted her head. The magic, when Anubis starts teaching you to use the power you carry, it's going to feel enormous. It's going to feel like standing next to a fire the size of a mountain. And if your body is afraid and your mind is panicking, you won't be able to use it. You'll flinch away from your own power. She looked at him directly. I am teaching you not to flinch. Harry was quiet for a moment. The river sound filled the courtyard. Okay, he said. He picked the staff back up. Again. She grinned, sharp-edged, brilliant. Again. The magic lessons had been, quietly, building since Harry was 5. Not wand magic. Harry had no wand, would not have a wand until Ollivanders, and the kind of magic Anubis was teaching him was so far outside the tradition of wand work that the comparison was almost amusing, like comparing a river to a garden hose. This was older magic. The magic of the Duat, of death and rebirth, of the fundamental transitions that the universe makes and has always made. The magic that underlies the magic. Anubis started with the simplest thing, stillness. Not physical stillness, though that was part of it. The stillness of the soul sense. The ability to quiet the constant low hum of Harry's own life, his heartbeat, his breath, his mortal warmth, enough to hear the thing underneath it, the deeper frequency, the one that had been there since the night a killing curse missed and left its mark. Harry had been doing this instinctively his entire life. Anubis was teaching him to do it with intention. "What do you feel?" Anubis said. They were by the river. Harry sat cross-legged, hands loose, eyes open. "Everything," Harry said. "It's too much." "Yes. Filter it. Begin with what is nearest." Harry breathed out. The flood of sensation, the thousands of souls in the Duat, their collective weight, the ambient energy of a place built from the very concept of transition, narrowed, slowly, painfully, to the immediate. The river. The cold of it. The specific chill of the dark water that was not actually water in any physical sense but was the medium through which the dead moved toward wherever they were going. "The river," Harry said. "Yes. And. He pushed further in. Felt the shape of it. The vast, unhurried purpose of it. Death was not unkind, he'd known this for years, had felt it in his bones since the first night in the Duat, but it was not gentle either. It was true. It was the truest thing in the universe, actually, this river, this movement. Everything that lived would come here. Every single thing. "It's patient," Harry said. "It doesn't hurry." "Because it doesn't need to," Anubis said. "It simply is. What is already true does not require urgency." A pause. "Now feel further. Into your own self. Below the soul sense. Below the scar." Harry stiffened slightly. He didn't like the scar work. He'd never said so directly to Anubis, but Anubis knew because Anubis always knew. The thing lodged in his scar had a texture he found deeply, instinctively wrong, not frightening, exactly, not anymore, but wrong the way a wrong note is wrong, a jarring dissonance in something that should be harmonious. The difference between a shard of someone else's soul and his own. "I feel it," Harry said. "Good. Don't engage with it. Simply observe." Harry observed. The shard sat there in the dark behind his scar, coiled and wrong and insistently present. It had a personality, in the way that all soul fragments had personality. It carried the emotional texture of the person it had come from, and that texture was fear. Deep, corrosive, consuming fear. Not of any specific thing. Fear of ending. Fear of the river. Fear of the scales. Fear of the Hall of Two Truths, which was, Harry reflected, exactly the kind of fear that guaranteed a bad outcome in the Hall of Two Truths. "It's afraid," Harry said. "All the time. It doesn't stop." "No," Anubis said. "It doesn't." "That sounds exhausting." "I imagine it is." Harry sat with the shard's fear for a moment, not absorbing it, not letting it color his own emotional landscape, just observing it the way he observed the souls in the hall. With the professional compassion of someone who had been taught that understanding something and being consumed by it are different acts. "When can we take it out?" Anubis was quiet for a moment. "There are conditions," he said. "The man who made it, who tore that piece of his soul loose and embedded it in you as a consequence of trying to kill you, is not fully destroyed. He persists, in pieces, in the mortal world." Harry opened his eyes and looked at Anubis. "How many pieces?" The pause was long enough to be its own answer. "Many," Anubis said, with a flatness that contained multitudes. He was sufficiently terrified of death to do something that should not be done multiple times over. Each time he did it, he diminished himself. What remains in him is barely a coherent identity. It is fear and will and nothing else. "The Horcruxes," Harry said. He'd read about them. There hadn't been a scroll specifically labeled Horcruxes, but he'd found the concept threaded through several texts on soul fracture and magical abomination, and he'd sat with it for a long time and then asked Anubis direct questions and gotten direct answers, because Anubis did not believe in protecting Harry from truths that concerned him. "They all have to go first." "Most of them, yes," Anubis said. "The one in your scar is the last. It cannot be removed safely until the others are gone, because the link between them, the common creator, is still a threat. Remove yours first, and the shock of a soul shard being properly destroyed by someone who knows what they're doing could alert the others. Destabilize the whole structure in ways that would be, he paused, searching for the word. Messy. Harry offered. Catastrophic, Anubis said. Messy is for amateurs. Harry almost smiled. So we go to the mortal world eventually and deal with the others. Yes. And then you can remove mine. Then we can address yours, yes. Properly. Safely. Anubis looked at him with those gold eyes. It will not harm you in the meantime. It is contained. But I want you to know, every year it sits there is a year of that man's fear living in proximity to your soul, and I would rather it did not. There was something in his voice when he said that, a clean, quiet anger, the kind that burned steady and very hot, that had been burning since the night he'd crouched in the doorway of that cupboard and looked at a 4-year-old with a borrowed spider and understood what had been done to him. Harry looked at the river. The dark water moved. The deep cold of it, the patient truth of it. It doesn't scare me, he said. The shard. A pause. He tried to die, the man it came from, he tried to die into me, basically. And I just. He tilted his head. I grew up in the Duat. I know what death is. I know what it isn't. It isn't something you can hide from or trade away or, he gestured at the shard, at the texture of its endless fear. That. Doing that. Anubis looked at him. And something in his expression did the thing it did sometimes, that shift, that ancient precursor of pride, the deep structural warmth that didn't manifest as smiling because Anubis was not built for easy sentimentality but was built for something more durable. No, he said. It isn't. The year Harry turned 10, Bastet threw a party. This required some context. Bastet had thrown parties before. She was, by nature and by ancient association, a goddess of celebration, festivals, music, joy as an act of protection, the kind of warmth that keeps the cold things back. Her parties were events. Previous attendees of her parties had described them, over the millennia, as life-changing, perspective-altering, and on one notable occasion, responsible for an entirely new musical tradition in Lower Egypt. She threw Harry's party in the secondary banquet hall, which she decorated with more flowers than should have been physically possible given that the Duat had no soil to grow them in. She had also, somehow, acquired a truly unreasonable number of cats. Harry had grown up with cats around him, Bastet's presence attracted them, and the Duat had its own variety, sleek and black-furred and cosmically composed, but she'd outdone herself. They were everywhere. On every surface. Several were on Anubis, who was bearing this with the dignity of a man who has chosen his battles and long since conceded the cat question. Thoth came. Harry had met Thoth before, ibis-headed, precise, carrying a stylus and a scroll at all times and clearly fighting the urge to take notes on everything, and Thoth gave Harry a book, which was so predictably Thoth that Harry laughed, and Thoth said, "Knowledge is the only gift worth giving," and Harry said, "I already have a lot of books," and Thoth said, "You do not have this book," and Harry opened it and found that it was blank. "It's empty," Harry said. "It is a book of questions," Thoth said. "The answers go in after." Harry turned it over in his hands. He looked at Thoth with the look. Thoth, who could read most people's thoughts on a good day, could not read Harry. The soul sense made him opaque in interesting ways, and so he simply watched the boy examine the gift with patient curiosity. "I like it," Harry said. He meant it. He wrote the first question in it that evening, "What does the shard dream about?" Then he thought about it, and wrote underneath, "Does it dream?" Then he thought about it more and wrote, "Does dreaming require a whole soul or just a piece?" He looked at the page. Then he wrote, "Ask Anubis." He fell asleep with the book on his chest and 3 cats on his feet. The incident with the corrupted soul happened 3 weeks after Harry's 10th birthday and constituted what Anubis later referred to as Harry's first real test. A soul arrived in the outer hall that was wrong from the moment it manifested. Not Horcrux wrong, not soul fracture wrong, this was darker, more ragged, the particular damage of a life spent in active and enthusiastic cruelty. The soul radiated it, actually, the self-satisfaction of it, the complete and practiced absence of the thing that makes weighing light possible. Several of Anubis's jackal-headed servants stepped back from it involuntarily. Harry was crossing the outer hall when it arrived. He stopped. He felt it immediately, the way you feel the difference between cold water and water that has something wrong in it. The soul saw him, souls always reacted to Harry, to the death sense around him, the threshold quality, the fact that he smelled to them of both living and not living, and it smiled, and it said, "And what are you, little godling?" in the tone of something that spent its life testing the weaknesses of others and had not yet understood that it had run out of opportunities to do so. Harry looked at it. He did the full reading, light, texture, the deep underneath, and what he found was not surprising but was extensive. He found a life built on the small, grinding cruelty of power over those who had none. Not dramatic evil. Mundane evil. The evil of deliberate unkindness dressed as practicality, of contempt made into a household policy, of a child's light systematically extinguished over years because the extinguisher found the light unpleasant. He knew what that felt like from the inside. He was not angry. He found, examining himself carefully, that he was not angry at all, and that this was not detachment but a deeper thing, the grief that Anubis had taught him about, the grief for irreversibility. This soul had had chances. Many chances. Small moments in which a different choice was available and the different choice was not taken. He could see the texture of them, the untaken paths. The soul said, "Cat got your tongue, boy." "The scales will catch you shortly," Harry said, and his voice was exactly what it always was, level, clear, carrying the slight resonant quality it had developed over years of living in a place that ran on the truth. "I'd spend less time talking to me and more time thinking about whether there's anything in you worth salvaging." The soul laughed. Harry walked on. In the Hall of Two Truths, Amit was waiting with the patience of something that had been waiting for a very long time and was not inconvenienced by waiting a little longer. Anubis appeared at Harry's shoulder. "You sensed it from the outer hall," he said. "Hard to miss," Harry said. "What did you feel?" Harry considered. "Grief," he said. And he searched for the other thing, the thing that had been underneath the grief, smaller and harder to name. "Anger," he said. "But not for me. For the people he did it to. The ones he had power over." He paused. "Is that appropriate? Being angry for someone else's experience?" "It is called justice," Anubis said, "when it remains in proportion. It is called vengeance when it does not." He walked beside Harry in silence for a moment. "You did not engage with it." "There was no point. There was nothing I could have said." "No," Anubis agreed. "The scales will say everything that needs to be said." He paused. "You've been ready for the hall," he said. "For some time. I've been making you wait because I wanted to see what you'd do when an impure soul spoke to you informally." He glanced sidelong at Harry. "You handled it correctly." Harry looked at him. "Was this a test?" "Everything is a test," Anubis said, which was the most Anubis possible answer to that question, and Harry snorted. "That's very convenient for you." "Yes," Anubis said, with the almost smile. "It is." That night, Harry sat on the bank of the dark river with his book of questions and wrote, "If Amit eats a soul and it ceases to exist, all of it, finally, no going anywhere else, is that mercy or punishment?" He thought about it for a while. Then he wrote, "Both. Depending on the soul." He closed the book. Across the river, the moving stars traced their deliberate paths. A cat, one of Bastet's, small and black with a white ear, materialized from the dark beside him and stepped onto his thigh and arranged itself with feline authority. Harry rested his hand on it. The cat purred. He thought about the Dursleys. He did this sometimes, not with longing, not with any desire to return, but with the examining quality he applied to everything, the looking at it. He thought about the cupboard and Susan's web and the way the lock had clicked at night. He thought about the cold that had changed the air and the voice that said Bastet and the doorway full of gold and godly enormity, and a 4-year-old who had asked about spiders. He was 10 years old and had read more about death and judgment and the movement of souls than most people learned in a lifetime, and had walked the halls of the oldest afterlife on earth, and could read the moral weight of a soul by looking at it, and could fight well enough that Bastet sometimes, in their training sessions, stopped pulling her punches. He was 10 years old and he was not the child who had been left in the cupboard, but the cupboard was in him somewhere, and would be always, the way all formative things are, not as damage, not anymore, but as foundation. The thing he was built on top of. The dark riverbed that gave the river its shape. He wrote one more question: what is it going to be like? The mortal world. The wizarding world. All of it. Then he wrote, underneath it, different from here. Louder. Less true. Then he crossed out less true and wrote, less practiced at truth. He put the book away. The cat on his thigh purred. The stars moved. Somewhere in the Duat, the scales clicked and reset, in their endless perfect rhythm. Measuring. Accounting. Making sure the universe remembered what everything weighed. Harry Potter, Haruank, breathed the old warm air of his home and felt, somewhere in the deep structural dark behind his scar, the shard of fear that did not belong to him, curled and coiled and desperately refusing the river. One day, he would give it what it was owed. Not yet. But one day. Chapter 3, the letter that was already expected. The owl arrived on a Tuesday. This was notable because owls did not, as a general rule, come to the Duat. Birds of the dead, ibises, falcons, the occasional vulture with divine purpose, yes. But a small tawny owl carrying a cream-colored envelope with a wax seal, looking extremely confused about its current navigational situation, was not something the Duat received regularly. It had gotten turned around somewhere in the transition between the mortal world's postal magic and the Duat's complete indifference to mortal postal magic, and it had ended up in the outer hall looking frazzled and deeply offended. Harry found it sitting on his book of questions, which he'd left on the hall table. He looked at the owl. The owl looked at him with the reproachful intensity of something that had been flying for a very long time under very strange circumstances and expected acknowledgement of this fact. "Sorry," Harry said. He held out his arm, and the owl stepped onto it with wounded dignity and presented the letter. Harry took it, and the owl immediately located a nearby carved frieze of Osiris and arranged itself on it in the manner of something that would be requiring a rest before it went anywhere. The envelope was addressed, in vivid emerald ink, to Mr. H. Potter, the Dark River's Shore, the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife. Harry stared at this for a moment. The Hogwarts tracking magic had, apparently, been persistent. He broke the seal and read the letter. Then he read it again. Then he walked through the great hall, down the corridor with the carved weighing scenes, out into the courtyard where Bastet was doing what she called maintenance and what was, to any outside observer, an extended and extremely aggressive fight with a practiced dummy that had done nothing to deserve it. "I got a letter," Harry said. Bastet drove her elbow through the dummy's midsection. From a school. In Scotland." She stopped. Turned. Her cat ears were angled forward in the way that meant full attention. "Let me see." Harry handed her the letter. She read it, tail moving in a slow, considering arc. Then she looked at him over the top of the parchment with those brilliant green eyes. "Well," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Anubis knows." "Not yet. I came to you first." Something in her expression softened for a fraction of a second before going firm again. "Come on, then," she said. "He's in the hall." Anubis read the letter once, folded it along its original crease with the precise, unhurried movements of someone who uses physical actions to give themselves thinking time, and set it on the scales workbench beside him. Not on the scales themselves, nothing went on the scales unless it was being weighed, and he was not ready to weigh this yet. "They've been looking for me," Harry said. It wasn't a question. Since 1984, Anubis said. Their headmaster has been looking. Albus Dumbledore, a considerable magical intelligence, deeply invested in the particulars of your life, for reasons that are both genuine and strategic. He picked up his staff, set it down. He had plans for you, Harry. Before we found you. Specific plans that involved your returning to the mortal world at 11, entering his school, and fulfilling a prophecy that concerns the man whose soul shard you carry. Harry looked at him. You knew about the prophecy. Yes. You didn't tell me. I told you what was relevant. A prophecy about a boy who was taken from the conditions the prophecy assumed is a different prophecy entirely. Anubis met his gaze directly, gold on green. Prophecies are not fixed. They describe what will happen if everything remains as it is. You were removed from the conditions of the prophecy 7 years ago. What it says about the boy it describes is largely inapplicable to what you are now. Harry sat down on the stone bench along the hall's eastern wall. He turned this over, methodically, the way Anubis had taught him to turn things over, examining each face before forming a conclusion. But the Horcruxes are still there, he said. The ones in the mortal world. The man himself, what's left of him, is still there. Yes. And they still need dealing with. Yes. Because they're an imbalance. Harry looked up at the scales, which were dark and still in this pre-processing hour. Every one of them is a fragment of soul that refuses the river. That refuses everything the scales stand for. It's not just that they're dangerous, they're wrong. They're an offense against Ma'at. Anubis was very still in the way that meant he was listening with complete attention. So I'm going, Harry said. Not because of the prophecy. Not because a headmaster had plans. Because the scales are out of balance and I'm the one who can read that and I'm the one who can fix it. He paused. And also because I want to see it. The mortal world. I want to see what it actually is. Bastet, leaning in the doorway with her arms folded, made no sound but her tail moved in one slow, satisfied arc. Anubis picked up the letter again. Looked at it. Hogwarts is a legitimate institution, he said. Thousands of years younger than anything here, but functional. The education is adequate for the mortal magical tradition. He set it down. You will not be the student they expect. Obviously, Harry said. Dumbledore will attempt to shape your understanding of what you are and what your purpose is. He can attempt things, Harry said, in a tone that was not rude, just factual. The tone of someone who has been raised by the god of death and the goddess of protection and genuinely cannot locate any anxiety about a headmaster's agenda. Anubis's almost smile did its thing. You'll need supplies. And you'll need to reacquaint yourself with the mortal world's pace before September. It's been 7 years. He stood. We go in 3 days. We? Harry said. Did you think we were sending you to a magical shopping district alone? I thought. Harry looked between them. Both of you? Bastet smiled, sharp and brilliant. Diagon Alley, she said, with the energy of someone who had been given a destination and was already considering what to destroy. I've always wanted to see what they did with a dragon bank. The transition back to the mortal world was different at 11 than it had been at 4. At 4, Harry hadn't had the framework to process it. Now he did. 7 years of living in a place built from the fundamental mechanism of transition had given him a profound sensitivity to the membrane between states of being. He felt the mortal world coming back around him the way you feel a coat being put on, familiar in shape, constraining in ways he'd forgotten. The sounds hit first. Traffic, birdsong, a distant radio. The light was wrong, too flat, too even, lacking the deep directional quality of the Duat's sourceless illumination. The air tasted of exhaust and cut grass and the specific ordinariness of a London July morning. They arrived in an alley off the Leaky Cauldron, because Bastet had insisted on a dramatic entrance point and Anubis had pointed out that arriving inside the Leaky Cauldron itself would cause unnecessary incident. Define unnecessary, Bastet had said. Any incident on the first day, Anubis had said, and she'd conceded the point. Harry stepped out of the alley and onto the street and stood very still for a moment. Mortal London moved around him, buses, pedestrians, pigeons with the vacant optimism of birds that had made poor evolutionary choices. A woman walked past talking into a mobile phone. A child dropped an ice cream cone and burst into tears with the uncomplicated directness of grief that hasn't yet learned proportion. Everything was so immediate. So present tense. The Duat operated on deep time, on the rhythms of geological patience, and the mortal world ran on a clock wound too tight, everything happening at once, nothing permanent, everything urgent. Harry breathed it in. "You look like someone who's been somewhere quiet for a long time," Bastet said beside him. She was wearing a form that chose to be stunning rather than divine, a tall woman, brown-skinned, with amber eyes and the bearing of someone who had never in their existence done anything unintentionally. The cats were not in evidence, but Harry could feel them nearby, the way you can feel a watched window even when you're not looking at it. "How does it feel?" "Loud," Harry said. "And very fast." He paused. "And interesting." "Everything here is so," he searched for the word. "Contingent. Everything could go differently. Every person I'm looking at is still choosing." "Yes," Bastet said. "That's the difference. Here, nothing has been weighed yet." "I know." He was already reading them, couldn't help it, the soul sense was always running, a background process he'd long since stopped trying to turn off. The woman on the phone was carrying a low-grade anxiety shaped like unresolved grief. The ice cream child's mother had the particular exhausted warmth of someone who loves deeply and sleeps badly. The bus driver had a heart as straightforward and steady as a good clock. "There's so much of it," Harry said. "So much living. It's completely different from the hull." "Different, not better or worse," Anubis said, on his other side. He was wearing a form that was impeccably dressed, dark and angular and precisely himself in every way that mattered, but human-featured, the jackal head held for the Duat. His golden eyes drew a second glance from everyone who passed, but London had its own policy of not engaging with things that seemed unusual, and so the second glances were all they got. "I know," Harry said. He turned toward the leaky cauldron. "Let's go." Tom the barman looked up when the door opened and had the specific reaction of a man who could not identify what was wrong but was very confident something was. It was the boy, mainly, small, dark-haired, 11 years old, wearing clothes that fit him now. Bastet had dealt with that, with green eyes that did the thing that some people's eyes did, that thing that meant something was happening behind them that the eyes were only the surface of. He walked in like he owned the floor he stood on, not aggressively, not with any attempt at performance, but with the complete absence of the self-consciousness that most children carried into unfamiliar places. Behind him, a tall woman who made Tom think inexplicably of his childhood cat, and a lean dark man who made Tom think inexplicably of nothing, because his mind kept sliding off the man and onto the middle distance. Tom poured a drink he hadn't been asked for and found himself saying, "Welcome, welcome," in a voice that wanted to be professionally cheerful and came out slightly reverent. "Thank you," Harry said. He looked around the leaky cauldron with the reading attention he gave to everything new. The magical folk at the tables, drinking their morning drinks, talking low, a witch in yellow robes doing something complicated with a quill and a piece of parchment. He felt each of them in passing. Nothing alarming. A crowd of ordinary lives, complex in the way living was always complex, nothing extraordinary in the soul sense. Then a man near the back looked up, and Harry felt it. Not threatening. Not dangerous. But aware in a way that the others weren't. The man had grey-blue eyes that were doing the same cataloging process that Harry's were, and when their eyes met there was a mutual recognition, which was one of the stranger experiences Harry had had, and he'd watched Ahmed eat a soul. Dumbledore was not at Hogwarts today. He was at the leaky cauldron, drinking what appeared to be a glass of pumpkin juice, wearing robes of an impractical purple, and looking at Harry with an expression that was carefully arranged into pleasant surprise but was actually, underneath, the expression of a man who had spent 7 years wondering and had, just now, begun to find out. Harry looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned to Tom and said, "We need to get to Diagon Alley," and Tom, with the alacrity of someone released from an awkward situation, led them to the back wall without another word. Behind Harry, Dumbledore set down his pumpkin juice very carefully. Bastet, passing his table, paused. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She just let the warmth around her shift, briefly, into the quality it had when she was marking something, not threatening, just noting. "I see you seeing him." A cat claiming awareness of a presence. Dumbledore's hand tightened fractionally on his glass. Then Bastet walked on, and the door to Diagon Alley opened, and they were through. Diagon Alley at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday in July was busy with back-to-school shopping energy. Families moved in clusters with lists and arguments and the particular exhaustion of parents who had been asked for things they hadn't budgeted for. First years could be identified by the way they looked at everything, heads swiveling, necks craning, the unguarded wonder of people encountering magic as a retail experience for the first time. Harry walked through it and looked at everything with the same calm curiosity he brought to the Duat's halls. This was not wonder suppression, he felt wonder, the Duat had never made him incapable of it, but the wonder he felt was the informed kind, the kind that comes from actually understanding what you're looking at. The apothecary smelled of mortal magic and desperation in roughly equal parts, and was very good at what it did within its limitations. Quality Quidditch Supplies was selling something based on competitive joy and the specifically human desire to go very fast without dying, which Harry found charming. Flourish and Blots had more books than he'd expected, and he spent 20 minutes there while Bastet expressed pointed opinions about the Transfiguration section and Anubis read the contents page of Advanced Rune Interpretation with the expression of someone encountering a dialect of a language they are fluent in. "This is simplified," Anubis said. "It's a school," Harry said, not looking up from the copy of magical theory he was examining. "I'm aware. Primary school, almost. Relative to, yes, Harry, I am aware of what it is relative to," Anubis said, with the patience of a man who was being extremely patient. Harry put magical theory back on the shelf and took a history of magic instead, because that was going to be the most honest book in the pile. He was right. He'd read 20 pages by the time they got to the robe shop, and the historical account, stripped of the deep context he already had, was fascinating in the way that folk memories of vast events always are. True in the broad strokes, gorgeously wrong in the details, shaped by what people needed to believe rather than what had actually happened. Madame Malkin's was the incident. Harry was being measured, standing on the footstool with his arms out, when the door opened and another boy was directed to the footstool beside him. This boy was blond, well-dressed, and had the manner of someone accustomed to being the most notable person in any given room. He looked at Harry the way some people look at weather, assessing it for how it might affect him personally. "Hogwarts," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "Know which house you'll be in yet?" The boy had already decided he was going to be in Slytherin, Harry could tell, not from the soul sense, just from the posture, the assumption, the certainty of someone who'd been promised a particular outcome and had never had reason to question the promise. "No," Harry said. "Slytherin, I expect, for me. Our whole family's been there." The boy was looking at Harry with the beginning of a more focused attention, trying to place him against the families he knew. "What's your name?" "Harry Potter," Harry said. The silence that followed was extremely informative. Harry watched the various things happen in the boy's face: recognition, recalibration, the rapid adjustment of social positioning, the particular mixture of awe and desire to establish superiority that characterized people who were impressed by something and wanted to own it rather than know it. He read it all in about 4 seconds and found it, primarily, sad in a low-key way. "The Harry Potter," the boy said. "Is there another one?" "I'm Malfoy. Draco Malfoy." Said with the expectation of recognition, of reciprocal status. Harry looked at him directly. He read the soul light around him briefly, not deeply. He'd learned not to deep-read people without cause. It felt like going through someone's pockets, just the surface. What he found was, intelligent, genuinely so, shaped by a family that loved him in the specific way that is inseparable from their own image of themselves, carrying a fear of being insufficient that he probably wasn't aware of yet. Not a bad soul. A complicated one. Draco, Harry said. The name meant dragon, which was either impressive or trying too hard depending on your perspective. Are you friendly to people before you know what family they're from? Draco blinked. What? Because you introduced yourself by your last name, not your first. Which tells me the family is what you're offering. Harry tilted his head slightly. I'm asking whether there's a person behind it. Draco stared at him. This was very clearly not how this conversation was supposed to go. Yes. Obviously. Then we might get on, Harry said, and turned back to Madame Malkin, who was doing her level best to pretend she was not listening to any of this. Draco spent the rest of the fitting very quiet and very thoughtful, which was probably not his usual operating mode. Harry didn't press it. He'd said what was true, what Draco did with it was his own business. Outside, Bastet was waiting with the expression of a cat that has watched something entertaining through a window. How was it? Fine, Harry said. There's a boy named after a dragon. He's going to need to decide who he actually is at some point. Most people do, Bastet said. Yes, but he's going to run into it sooner than most. Harry looked up the alley toward Gringotts, white and vast and slightly menacing in the midday sun. Can we do the bank now? Gringotts was the best thing in Diagon Alley by a considerable margin. Not because of the vaults or the gold. Harry had lived for 7 years in a place that treated gold as a material for workmanship rather than a symbol of wealth, and was not particularly impressed by large quantities of it. No, what Harry liked about Gringotts was the goblins. He liked the goblins because they were old, not as old as the Duat. Nothing in this thin mortal magical world was as old as the Duat, but old enough that their soulite had the particular texture of a people with deep collective memory and long institutional grievance and a kind of intelligence that did not operate on human rhythms. The goblin at the front desk looked at Harry. Harry looked back. He did the brief read and found, unexpectedly, a sense of humor so dry it was practically fossilized. Harry Potter, the goblin said, checking the list. Yes, Harry said. Vault 713 has also been flagged for your visit, the goblin said, in the neutral tone of someone reading a note that means something without advertising what. Per the instructions left in 1981 by Albus Dumbledore. Harry looked at the goblin. Flagged for me specifically? The goblin regarded him with the beady, evaluating attention of something that had been assessing the reliability of humans for several centuries and had not revised upward. The instructions say the vault is to be noted to Mr. Potter during his first Gringotts visit. A pause. They do not say he must access it. The instructions are quite specific on that point. Harry understood what this meant. Dumbledore had set up a prompt, a gentle steerage. Come to Gringotts, hear about the vault, understand that something important is kept there, eventually investigate. A thread in a carefully constructed web, installed 7 years before the spider arrived. What's in it? Harry asked. Gringotts does not discuss the contents of, is it still there? The goblin paused. A micro-expression crossed its face that meant something. It was removed some weeks ago, it said, after a beat. Harry was very still for a moment. He felt the shard in his scar. It had been quiet all day, the overstimulation of the mortal world keeping his attention elsewhere, and now he felt it do something that was almost a pulse. A recognition. The thing in his scar knew what had been in that vault. They were the same kind of thing, these hidden pieces. The same wrong texture. Someone took it, Harry said. Not a question. The goblin said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Thank you, Harry said. He processed his vault transaction with complete composure. He had enough gold to last several lifetimes, the Potter vault apparently having been managed with reasonable competence in his absence, and was walking back through the marble hall when he stopped. Anubis was beside him. You felt it, Anubis said quietly. It was in that vault. A Horcrux. Harry kept his voice flat, informational. And someone took it already. Dumbledore's setup, the prompt to come and look, he was expecting me to find it there and presumably follow the thread. But someone else took it first. The man himself, Anubis said. What remains of him? He has been gathering his pieces, or having them gathered. A pause. This is why we're moving now. Harry looked up at the ceiling of Gringotts, which was gold and vast. How many are already in play? The diary, Anubis said. The locket. The cup. The diadem. The ring. He counted them with the flat precision of someone reading a ledger. The stone from the vault, which I believe is the one item in this building that was not a Horcrux but was sufficiently protected to interest the same parties. And the snake. A pause. And yours. Harry did the count. That's too many, he said, which was both a mathematical statement and a philosophical one. Yes, Anubis said. He's barely a person anymore, is he? Harry said. Not with pity, exactly. With the diagnostic calm of someone assessing structural damage. Each one took something. He has been diminishing himself for 30 years. What remains of him is approximately what you sensed in your scar, Anubis said. Fear. Will. And a desperate hunger for the thing he has been running from since he first understood what it was. Harry thought about the dark river. The patient water. The cold that was not cruel, just true. He's going to come to Hogwarts, Harry said. Before the year is out. He can't help it, there's something there he wants. The Philosopher's Stone, Anubis said. Yes. I know. Harry looked at him. You knew it was there. I know where all the Horcruxes are, Anubis said, with the absolute factual serenity of a god who runs the afterlife and has been monitoring a specific soul imbalance for 7 years. I have known since 1984. Harry absorbed this. Then he said, we should have a conversation about information sharing at some point. We will, Anubis said. I tell you what you need, when you need it. That is not deception, it is education. It's also very convenient for you, Harry said. Yes, Anubis said, without shame. It is. They were on their way back through the alley, Harry carrying his books, Bastet having acquired several things she had not technically needed but had wanted, including a very fine dagger from a shop that wasn't officially supposed to sell to civilians, when Dumbledore appeared. He came from between an apothecary and a bookshop, materializing into their path with the practiced ease of someone very good at being in places he was expected to be. He was wearing the purple robes Harry had seen in the leaky cauldron, and up close, the eyes behind the half-moon glasses were a precise and luminous blue, and they were doing the same cataloging thing Harry's were, and unlike most people's eyes, they were doing it with considerable competence. Harry Potter, Dumbledore said. His voice was warm, considered, carrying the register of someone who had decided on gentle and was executing it with technical mastery. I had hoped we might speak. Harry stopped. He looked at Dumbledore with the full read, not invasively, but completely. He found extraordinary intelligence, genuine warmth, genuine care, and underneath those genuine things, a strategic architecture so comprehensive and long-term that most people would never see it operating. Not malice. Something more complicated. The architecture of someone who had decided, so long ago that he no longer heard the decision, that his own judgment was the most reliable instrument in any given situation. The man did not have a bad heart. Harry could see that clearly. But the man's heart operated at the center of a web of his own construction, and he had long since stopped questioning whether the web was appropriate. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. Pleasantly. Dumbledore smiled, the warm, specific smile of someone encountering a surprise that pleases them. I see my reputation precedes me. I must say, you are not quite what I expected. He glanced at Anubis and Bastet with the controlled reaction of a man encountering something he does not have a category for and managing the absence of category with elegant professionalism. Your guardians. My family, Harry said. Something moved in Dumbledore's expression. Of course. I confess, I had wondered, over the years, what had become of you. Where you had gone. The tracking charms, the monitoring spells, couldn't find me, Harry said. No, they couldn't. What were you hoping to discuss? Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, the look of someone recalibrating. He had been expecting a boy with 7 years of absence to be uncertain, unformed, in need of orientation and careful guidance. What he was finding was something considerably less tractable. Hogwarts, he said. Your education. I know you have received your letter, the charm that tracks its delivery confirmed as much. He paused. I had hoped to offer some context. About the wizarding world. About your position in it. About certain responsibilities that attach to your particular history. The prophecy, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a beat. You know about it. I know about the Horcruxes too, Harry said. All of them. Their locations, their states, what it will take to address them. He met Dumbledore's eyes directly, the blue on green, the mutual intelligence, the very different depths behind each pair. I'm coming to Hogwarts, Professor. Not because of the prophecy. Not as your instrument. Because the imbalance is real and it needs addressing and I am the one equipped to address it. He tilted his head slightly. I want to be clear about that distinction early, so neither of us wastes time on a misunderstanding. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in the blue eyes, not offense, not calculation, but something more interesting. Genuine reassessment. You are not what I expected, Dumbledore said again, but this time it didn't sound like a pleasant surprise. It sounded like a man looking at a plan that no longer fits the territory. No, Harry said. I don't imagine I am. He smiled, not unkindly. But I suspect you'll find I'm less of a problem than you're anticipating and more of an asset than you're currently crediting. Dumbledore smiled too. The smile of someone who plays chess at a very high level encountering a board configuration that interests them. I look forward to the school year, Harry. As do I, Harry said. He walked past. Bastet, passing Dumbledore, looked at him directly for exactly 1 second. Her eyes were warm and brilliant and absolutely unambiguous. He is ours. He is well. Don't. Not threatening. Not hostile. Just the clarity of a goddess of protection establishing the fundamental facts. Dumbledore stood in the middle of Diagon Alley and watched them walk away with the expression of a very intelligent man updating a very complex model. That evening they ate in a small restaurant off a side street that Bastet had found by the time-honored method of walking past it and deciding it smelled acceptable. It had 4 tables, all of them full, and one of the other diners had a cat on his lap that stared at Bastet with the reverent intensity of something recognizing something divine, and Bastet stared back, and the cat fell asleep. Harry ate a lamb stew and watched the London evening through the window, the purple light over the rooftops, the couples walking dogs, a child being carried on someone's shoulders and laughing about it. The ordinary human machinery of a Tuesday night in the mortal world. Are you nervous? Bastet asked. No, Harry said. You're allowed to be, she said, in the voice that was different from her training voice and her planning voice, the voice that was just her, the goddess of the hearth and protection and the care of small things. I know, Harry said. But I'm not. He looked at his stew. I'm. He searched for it. Curious. There are going to be a lot of people there. A lot of living people, all making choices, all carrying their histories. And none of them have been where I've been or seen what I've seen, and some of them are going to be difficult. A pause. But that's just people. That's what people are. And Dumbledore? Anubis said. Harry thought about the blue eyes and the web behind them. The genuine warmth and the genuine strategy and the way they were so thoroughly intertwined that the man probably couldn't tell them apart anymore. He's not a bad person, Harry said. He's a person who has been the most important person in every room he's been in for so long that he has forgotten how to be in a room where that's not true. He ate a spoonful of stew. That's a hard thing to learn late. But I think he's smart enough to manage it. Generous assessment, Bastet said. Accurate one, Harry said. There's a difference. Anubis looked at him across the table, the gold eyes, the deep and patient attention of them. You will write, he said. Or send word through the usual channels. The usual channels, Harry said. You mean the fact that every cat in Scotland will report to you directly. Every cat in Scotland, Bastet confirmed, without any trace of embarrassment, will absolutely report to me directly. I know, Harry said. I'm not worried. Outside the window, London continued its urgent, contingent, completely unweighed existence. Choices everywhere. Lives still open, still running, still capable of going differently. The opposite of the Hall of Two Truths, where everything was already known. Harry found he liked it. The openness of it. The way nothing was fixed yet. He finished his stew. Tomorrow he'd go back to the Duat for the remaining weeks of summer, and then September 1st would come, and the train would leave from a platform that could not decide whether it was 9 or 10, and Hogwarts would open its doors for the first time to someone who had been trained by gods, who carried death like a second skin, who had watched the scales of cosmic justice balance 10,000 souls and had wept and learned and grown in the oldest halls in all of existence. He was going to be completely fine. He was also, he suspected, going to be absolutely terrifying to the defense against the dark arts teacher. He didn't know yet how right he was about that. Chapter 4, Platform 9 3/4 does not impress me. The barrier between platforms 9 and 10 was, objectively, not the most impressive threshold Harry had ever walked through. He'd crossed the boundary between the living world and the land of the dead at age 4. He'd walked the edges of the Duat where existence became something else entirely, where the concept of place started to lose its structural integrity and the only thing keeping your sense of self coherent was the discipline Anubis had spent years building into him. He had, on one memorable occasion, helped Bastet retrieve a soul that had gotten lodged in a transitional space between two afterlife traditions and had to be carefully extracted like a splinter from somewhere deeply inconvenient. A brick wall in London that led to a train station was, in the grand scheme of thresholds, fairly modest. Harry walked through it at a measured pace, his trunk floating behind him at waist height. He'd stopped bothering to drag things, roughly around the time he'd realized he could feel the precise weight of objects as an energy signature and redirect it without much effort, and stepped onto platform 9 3/4. He stopped. Looked at it properly. The Hogwarts Express was an extraordinarily red train, which he appreciated. Everything about it communicated solidity and intention, the brass fittings, the hiss of steam, the particular quality of magic worked into the engine over decades until the machine had absorbed it the way old stone absorbs warmth. He liked it immediately and unconditionally, the way he liked all things that had been made carefully and maintained with care. The platform itself was organized chaos. Families clustered in islands of luggage and emotion, parents with the specific anxiety of people releasing children into independence for the first time, students with the various social negotiations of people returning to an established hierarchy, first years with wide eyes and the stunned stillness of people processing too much at once. Owls complained. Cats moved through ankles with feline disregard for human traffic patterns. The soul sense was extraordinary. In the Duat, the souls Harry felt were post-life, settled, assessed, the turbulence of living smoothed by the process of dying. Here, on this platform, he was surrounded by approximately 200 living people, all of them blazing with the unresolved, ongoing complexity of people still in the middle of their story. It was overwhelming and magnificent, the way standing in front of a waterfall is overwhelming and magnificent, too much to take in all at once, so you stop trying and just stand in it. He breathed through it, ran the filtering practice Anubis had taught him, and sorted the immediate from the background. Then he picked up his trunk and found a compartment. The compartment Harry chose was at the quieter end of the train. He stowed his trunk, sat beside the window, and opened a history of magic, which he'd been reading since Diagon Alley and which got more interesting the deeper in he got, not because the history was accurate but because the inaccuracies were their own kind of historical text. They showed what the wizarding world chose to remember and how, which was at least as interesting as what had actually happened. He was 3 chapters in when the compartment door opened and a red-haired boy leaned in, slightly out of breath, with a rat in his breast pocket and the expression of someone who has run out of options. "Everywhere else is full," the boy said. "Or full of people I'd rather not sit with. Can I?" He gestured at the seat across from Harry. "Yes," Harry said. The boy came in, shoved his trunk onto the rack with more muscle than finesse, dropped into the seat across with the bonelessness of someone made almost entirely of long limbs, and let out the breath of the successfully located. "Ron," he said. "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter," Harry said, and went back to his book. There was a pause. "Harry Potter?" Ron said. Harry turned a page. "Yes. I'm sorry, Harry Potter, like, the, yes," Harry said, still reading. Another pause. He could feel Ron reorganizing his expectations in real time, which was a specific and slightly tactile sensation when you could feel the soullight around someone shifting. Ron Weasley had a soullight that was warm and straightforward and shot through with a fierce, unpretentious loyalty that Harry recognized immediately as the rarest kind, the kind that came from genuine feeling rather than obligation or social calculation. He also had a competitive streak about 12 miles wide and a deep-seated anxiety about being insufficient, which were fighting each other in interesting ways. "You're reading," Ron said, identifying the problem. "I am," Harry said. "On a train. It's where I am." Harry lowered the book slightly and looked at Ron, who had the open, readable face of someone who had never successfully hidden anything in his life and had probably stopped trying. He offered his hand. "It's good to meet you." Ron shook it with the slightly dazed look of someone who had expected a very different conversation. "Yeah. Yeah, good to meet you too." He glanced at the book. "A History of Magic? You're not even on the way to school yet." "I know," Harry said. "It's interesting. It's Binza's textbook. I'm aware. The inaccuracies are interesting." Harry looked at Ron's expression. "The rat," he said. Ron looked down at the pocket where a grey rat's head was protruding. "Scabbers. He's been in my family for years. He's my brother's, actually, Percy's, but Percy didn't want him anymore so," he shrugged. "He's a rubbish rat. He doesn't do anything." Harry looked at the rat. He looked at it the way he looked at things when the soul sense snagged on something, which it had. The rat's soullight was wrong. Not Horcrux wrong, not the sharp ripping wrongness of a fractured soul, but wrong in a specific way that took him a moment to identify. It was the soullight of something pretending to be less than it was. Old, too old, a rat's life shouldn't be that old, and there were layers in it. "How long has your family had him?" Harry asked. "Since my dad was little. He's ancient, basically." Ron pulled Scabbers out and examined him. "See? Nothing. He just sleeps." Harry looked at Scabbers for another 3 seconds, filed what he'd found in the relevant section of his internal library, and returned to his book. He would deal with the rat in due time. It was not immediately dangerous, it was simply profoundly not what it appeared to be. "He's older than he should be," Harry said. "Has your family ever looked into why?" Ron blinked. "He's just a rat." Harry said, which was not disagreement. Ron put Scabbers back in his pocket and looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has met a person who talks like they know things you don't, and isn't sure whether to be annoyed or curious. He landed on curious, the loyalty warmth in his soullight nudged him there. "You're strange," he said. "I've been told," Harry said. "In a good way," Ron added, quickly. Then, as if surprised he'd said it, "I think. I've not decided yet." Harry smiled at his book. "Fair enough," he said. The witch with the trolley came and went. Ron ate 3 cauldron cakes with the focus of someone genuinely committed to the experience. Harry had a handful of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans with the exploratory attitude he brought to all new sensory data. He got grass, then something that tasted of old parchment, then one that tasted of pure inexplicable blue. What did that one taste like? Ron asked. Blue, Harry said. That's not a flavor. Tell that to the bean. The compartment door opened again, this time without a knock or a lean-in, just a direct open by someone who moved as though expected, and a girl with large brown eyes and an even larger quantity of bushy hair looked at them both with the systematic assessment of someone running a checklist. Have either of you seen a toad? Neville's lost his. She didn't wait for an answer about the toad before pivoting. You've both got interesting magical signatures, actually. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all the textbooks, all the Hogwarts textbooks, and done a lot of outside reading. Have you done outside reading? Ron's face went through several phases. Harry looked at her. The reading was immediate and comprehensive. Hermione Granger had a soul light that was precise and densely packed, the light of someone in whom intelligence and feeling ran along the same channels so thoroughly intertwined that they couldn't be separated, which meant she cared ferociously about everything she thought about, including and especially things other people considered purely academic. She had a loneliness that sat in her like a stone she'd been carrying for so long she'd stopped noticing the weight. She was also, Harry noticed, looking at him with the calibrated intensity of someone who had read everything available on Harry Potter and was already identifying the gaps between the text and the reality. Harry said. Outside reading. Which subjects? She said immediately. Death, Harry said. The afterlife. Soul theory. Magical history, mostly pre-Hogwarts, actually pre-Common Era. Combat. Languages. Some astronomy, though the Duat's astronomy is quite different from your conventional. Hermione stared at him. The Duat, she said. Yes. The Egyptian Duat. Yes. She looked at him with the expression of someone whose checklist has been rendered completely useless. You've been in the Duat. I've been living there for 7 years, Harry said. The silence that followed was the silence of a very organized mind encountering information that doesn't fit any current file and needing to create a new one. Harry watched her do it. It was genuinely impressive. Most people, when faced with a fact that disrupted their model of reality, pushed back against the fact. Hermione immediately started adjusting the model. That would explain, she said slowly, why the conventional locator spells couldn't find you. The Duat operates on a completely different metaphysical substrate. It's outside the monitoring range of standard wizarding magic entirely. She sat down, next to Ron, who shifted his knees out of the way with a look of someone who has been displaced before and knows there is nothing to be done about it. And your magical signature, I noticed it when I came in. It's not like anything I've read about. She reached for a word. Deeper. Yes, Harry said. What are you? She said, and the question was not rude, it was the question of genuine scientific curiosity delivered without the social wrapping most people put on questions they're afraid to ask. He appreciated the directness. Harry Potter, he said. Still. But also, something older, he said. Something the wizarding world doesn't have a great taxonomy for. He looked at her steadily. The short version is that I was raised by Anubis and Bastet, trained in the magic of death and transition, and I've come back to address an imbalance that's been building since before I was born. Hermione was quiet for 4 seconds, which Harry suspected was the longest 4 seconds of her intellectual life. Then she said, I'm going to need to do more research. I know, Harry said. I'll help, where I can. She looked at him with an expression that was the beginning of something. Trust, perhaps, or the specific connection that forms between people who have both, for different reasons, spent their lives being more interested in truth than in comfort. You're not going to be what anyone expects, are you? She said. No, Harry said. Ron, from the corner, said, he reads history of magic for fun, Hermione. So do I, she said. I know, Ron said, in the tone of someone identifying a pattern. Harry had been aware of Quirrell since the corridor outside the Great Hall. He'd felt the wrongness from 20 feet away, not the same wrongness as Scabbers, not the pretending to be less quality, but the deeply specific wrongness of the shard in his own scar, the same texture, the same signature, the same desperate clinging fear dressed in the will to persist. The turban was a poor attempt at containment. It was like trying to hold smoke with a handkerchief. He said nothing. He walked into the great hall with everyone else, looked at the enchanted ceiling, a magnificent piece of sustained magical engineering that he genuinely appreciated, and found a place to stand with the other first years while the hat was brought out. The sorting hat was alive, in a way that fabric objects occasionally became alive when they'd been used for a specific purpose for a sufficient amount of time. Harry felt it as soon as the thing moved, a concentrated awareness, dense and observational, surveying the line of students with the efficient focus of something that had been doing this for centuries and had a very good system. It was singing. Harry listened politely to the song, which was more interesting than expected. The hat composed a new one each year, apparently, and the intelligence required to do that while simultaneously processing the complete psychological and moral contents of 512-year-old minds was actually remarkable. The list went alphabetically. Hermione went to Gryffindor with the expression of someone arriving at their calculated destination. Draco Malfoy, who had materialized in the line at some point with two large shadows that Harry identified as people whose purpose in Draco's life was to reflect his status back at him rather than actually know him. Draco went to Slytherin before the hat had been on his head for 5 seconds, which was less a sorting decision and more an acknowledgement that the decision had already been made. Then the list got to P. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet in a specific way, the particular quality of silence that falls when a room full of people simultaneously decides to pay very close attention. Harry walked forward and sat on the stool. The hat dropped over his ears. There was a pause. Then the hat said, in the private internal space of the sorting, "Oh. Oh, that is not something I've encountered before." "No," Harry agreed, internally. You've been somewhere. Somewhere very old. The presence in your mind is, the structure of it," a pause while the hat evidently ran through its considerable archive of everything it had ever assessed. "You've been touched by Maat. I've been raised by her faithful," Harry said. "The scar," the hat recoiled fractionally. "There is something in your scar that I would prefer not to examine closely." "Then don't," Harry said. "It's contained." "Very well." The hat settled. "Now. Where to put you?" Because the usual criteria, bravery, ambition, intelligence, loyalty, apply to you in a way that feels like trying to measure a river with a ruler. The usual categories are, "I know," Harry said. "Where would be most useful?" The hat paused. "Most useful. I'm here for a reason," Harry said. "Where would I do the most good? Where would the people around me benefit most from what I am?" The hat was quiet for a long moment. Harry could feel it processing, not in the way it processed normal students, with the quick shuffle and sort of personality metrics, but with the careful deliberation of something dealing with a genuinely unprecedented input. "Gryffindor," the hat said. "Not because of bravery, though you have it in a form that would terrify the students who think of themselves as brave. But because the people in Gryffindor are the ones who will need to know what you are. The ones whose lives will intersect with the imbalance you've come to address. And because you need people who act, not just think." A pause. "Also because putting you in Slytherin would give Severus Snape a stroke and that would be inconvenient for the school." Harry almost laughed. "Gryffindor," he said. "Gryffindor," the hat shouted. The Gryffindor table cheered. Harry walked to it with the same measured pace he'd walked onto the platform with, sat down, and was immediately surrounded by the enthusiastic welcome of a house that had been waiting for him and expected a specific person and was already beginning to find that the specific person they'd expected and the actual person sitting among them were somewhat different propositions. He ate the feast with genuine pleasure. The Duat's food was excellent, but there was something particularly good about the food of the living world, it had an immediacy that reflected the urgency of life itself, the fact that bodies needed sustaining, that warmth was temporary and therefore precious. He had 3 helpings of roast chicken. Classes started on Wednesday, and Harry's assessment of them was rapid. Transfiguration was McGonagall, who transformed her desk into a pig and back before a single student had finished sitting down, which was a demonstration of power delivered with the efficiency of someone who considers introductions a waste of time. Harry liked her immediately. Her soul light was precise and fair and shot through with a specific kind of love for her subject that had survived 30 years of teaching without diminishing. When she asked the class to attempt turning a match into a needle, Harry looked at the match for approximately 2 seconds, felt the energy architecture of it. The spell theory Anubis had been teaching him for years was deep in his bones by now, not learned but integrated, and changed it. Not just into a needle. Into a needle of exceptional quality, with a threading eye so fine it barely existed, the match's wooden essence still faintly present in the grain of the metal. McGonagall picked it up. She looked at it. She looked at Harry. "You've done this before," she said. "Not specifically," Harry said. "But the theory is straightforward." "The theory," McGonagall said, with the careful control of someone keeping a reaction inside its appropriate proportions. "The structural conversion principle is the same across most material transmutation," Harry said. "You're reorganizing the fundamental pattern. The difficulty is usually in holding the target pattern clearly enough to impose it, but if you know your own magical signature well enough, the imposition is." He stopped. McGonagall was looking at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize, the expression that intelligent adults wore when they realized they were going to have to significantly revise their expectations of someone. "Sorry," he said. "Was that too much?" "Not too much," McGonagall said precisely. "Simply, more than expected for the first lesson." She set the needle down with what seemed like deliberate care. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said, in the tone of someone doing the institutional minimum while privately processing at a much larger scale. Herbology was Professor Sprout, whose soul light was warm and earthy and deeply kind in the comfortable way of people who have spent most of their lives with plants and borrowed their patience. Harry found it restful. He also found Devil's Snare somewhat overstated as a threat. The darkness response reflex it had was essentially a variant of the same principle governing several of the Duat's more aggressive entities, and those tended to respond to a specific quality of stillness rather than just light, but he didn't say this, because it wasn't relevant yet. Charms was Flitwick, who was standing on a stack of books to see his students and who had a genuine gift for making something complex feel approachable. The soul light of a natural teacher, the ones who actually loved watching understanding arrive in other people, who felt the moment a concept clicked in a student the way a musician feels a harmony resolve. Harry worked through the swish and flick of Wingardium Leviosa at the pace of the class, not because he couldn't go faster, but because he was watching Hermione beside him work through it with a focused intensity that was extraordinary. She got it before anyone else, including Harry, who had been going at half speed and felt only slightly guilty about this. Ron, across the table, sent his feather sideways with enough force to hit Seamus Finnegan, who had somehow set his feather on fire, which given that the spell had nothing to do with fire was an achievement of sorts. "Swish and flick," Hermione said, without looking up from her own immaculate hovering feather. "The wrist movement has to be, are you doing it too fast?" "I'm doing it the right speed," Ron said. "Your elbow is up," Hermione said. Ron's elbow was, in fact, up. Harry watched this exchange with the warm interest he was developing for the specific social dynamics of Gryffindor Tower. Ron and Hermione fought like people who would one day be very close, the particular friction of two people whose difference was the thing that made each of them better. Then defense against the dark arts happened. Harry had been careful all week. Deliberately, intentionally careful, he'd been present, he'd engaged, he'd participated at a pace that didn't announce itself too loudly. Not hiding, never hiding, but not performing either. Just being in the room and doing the work and watching. Defense against the dark arts with Professor Quirrell was the moment that careful behavior stopped being useful. Quirrell taught with the quality of someone performing competence rather than possessing it. The soul sense overlay on him was uncomfortable. Standing in Quirrell's classroom was like standing next to a fire and also standing next to a void at the same time, the living warmth of Quirrell's own soul and the cold clinging wrongness of what was attached to the back of his head, and the interaction between the two was producing a specific kind of moral static that Harry found deeply unpleasant. He sat in the front row because he'd decided early that he was not going to perform smallness in any room in this building. Quirrell was teaching the theory of dark creature defense, which would have been fine if Quirrell had been actually teaching it rather than reading it off prepared notes with the air of someone hoping no one would notice the difference between knowledge and script. Harry listened to the content and ignored the delivery, which was easy enough, but then Quirrell made the mistake. He asked for examples. "Can anyone tell me," Quirrell said, with the slightly stuttering effect he wore like a costume, the correct approach to a dark entity that resists standard repelling charms? Harry said, "What kind of entity?" Quirrell looked at him. The wrongness on him pulsed. Harry felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure, a micro-adjustment, the something underneath Quirrell paying attention. What? The category matters, Harry said. An entity that resists standard repelling charms because of its nature is a different problem from one that resists because the charms are being improperly cast, which is different again from one that resists because of an active ward or a binding. The approach for each is different. He kept his voice level, informational, exactly as he would in any discussion of theory. So, what kind of entity? The class had gone very quiet. Not the normal first-year class quiet of people not wanting to be called on, a different quality. The quiet of people watching something that wasn't in the lesson plan. Quirrell said, yes, well, the distinction is, an entity bound to a host, Harry said, and watched, for example, would be resistant to standard repelling charms because the charm targets the entity's free presence. If it's anchored to something living, you're dealing with a different magical interface entirely. The correct approach in that case is to address the anchor, not the entity. Remove what's keeping it tethered and the charm becomes effective, or unnecessary. The wrongness under Quirrell's turban pulled tight like a wire under tension. Quirrell's hands had gone still on the desk. His eyes, his own eyes, the human ones, still Quirrell's own whatever else he'd agreed to, were looking at Harry with a very specific expression, the expression of someone who has heard something that hit too close to home and cannot decide whether to address it or flee it. "That's a very advanced concept," Quirrell said. "It's in 3 different books in the restricted section," Harry said pleasantly. "And in several texts considerably older than the restricted section." The wrongness pulsed again. Harry met it, internally, with the absolute stillness of someone who had lived next to that specific texture of fear for his entire remembered life, who had grown up in its proximity, who knew its shape and weight and could feel exactly what it was. He knew what was under the turban the way he knew what was behind his scar, the same maker, the same soul signature, the same desperate coiling refusal of everything the river represented. He did not announce this. He noted it, settled it into the working file he kept on the Horcruxes, and moved on. Quirrell moved on too, with the slightly dazed quality of someone whose lesson had been derailed by a student and who wasn't sure how to get it back on track. He covered 3 more topics badly and dismissed the class early. In the corridor, Ron walked beside Harry and said, "He looked terrified of you." "Did he?" Harry said. "You noticed." "I noticed things," Harry said. "That thing you said, about entities bound to hosts." Ron looked at him with the direct, unsentimental perceptiveness that came naturally to someone who'd grown up in a house full of people and learned to read the room early. "You weren't just talking about theory." Harry looked at him for a moment. He weighed, not with the scales, just with the ordinary judgment of someone deciding how much of the truth was appropriate for this particular conversation in this particular corridor. Ron's soullight was steady and warm and shot through with loyalty and the specific brand of courage that is less about being unafraid and more about being afraid and doing the thing anyway. "Not entirely," Harry said. Ron nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. He didn't ask for more. Just, "Okay, I see that this is real, I'm not running from it." "Want to go to dinner?" "Yes," Harry said. The first week resolved itself into a rhythm. Harry went to classes, ate meals, read in the evenings, and built the first careful structures of what would become genuine friendship, with Ron, who was funny and direct and had no capacity for pretension, and with Hermione, who had begun coming to Harry every evening with questions, sometimes about his past, sometimes about the theory behind things she'd observed him do in class, sometimes purely academic in the way that was her way of showing she was comfortable. He was also being watched. He was aware of it and had been since the feast. Dumbledore's careful attention from the high table, present at every meal, never aggressive, just the steady cataloguing of a man recalibrating a complex understanding. Snape's attention, which was hostile in a different way, not threatened, but proprietary in a way Harry found somewhat mystifying until he understood that Snape had also expected a specific version of Harry Potter and had prepared a specific relationship with that version, and the arrival of something that didn't conform to the prepared relationship was profoundly disorienting for him. And Quirrell watched, but Quirrell's watching was not Quirrell. It was what was under the turban, reaching out with the blind, grasping attention of something that could feel the resonance of its own soul signature in the scar on Harry's forehead. Harry let it reach. He didn't engage, didn't retreat, just let the attention find what it was looking for and discover nothing more than what was already known. The shard was there, contained, patient. Not afraid. Never afraid. On Friday evening, Harry sat in the Gryffindor common room by the fire with his book of questions. The fire was good, Bastet would have approved of it, and the common room had the quality of a place that had been inhabited with feeling for a long time, walls and furniture and worn rugs all carrying the emotional residue of decades of students who had lived here with the full intensity of adolescence. He wrote, Quirrell's accelerating. Whatever Voldemort needs from this school, he's going to move toward it before the year is out. How long depends on how patient he can afford to be and how frightened Quirrell actually is. He looked at this. Then he wrote, Quirrell is very frightened. Timeline, before spring. He looked at the fire. Ron had fallen asleep over a chess game, which he'd been winning before sleep claimed him. Hermione was reading across the room, quill in hand, annotating her own notes with the committed energy of someone who considered passive reading a wasted opportunity. She looked up, as if feeling his attention. What are you writing? Notes, he said. On what? He held up the book of questions so she could see the cover but not the page. Questions, he said. She looked at him with the expression she'd been developing all week, the one that was simultaneously cataloging and personal, learning to hold both at once. You already know some of the answers, don't you, she said. You're writing the questions you already know the answers to keep track of what you know. Harry looked at her. Yes, he said. Exactly that. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her notes. Outside the common room windows, the Scottish sky was enormous and clear, and the stars moved in their conventional paths, not purposeful, not deliberate, just the ordinary rotation of the planet, which was its own kind of rhythm. Harry looked at them and thought about the moving stars in the Duat, the ones that moved like they had somewhere to be. He thought about the dark river and the sound of scales resetting. He thought about Anubis's gold eyes and Bastet's warm absolute certainty and the bowl of fruit that was always stocked on the low shelf. He was not homesick. Not exactly. He carried it with him. The Duat was in him the way the riverbed shapes the river, the way the door that doesn't lock from the outside had become foundation rather than damage. He was where he needed to be. The imbalance was here, in this school, in the turban of a frightened man who had made a terrible bargain, and in the corridors and the vaults and the hidden places that Hogwarts had accumulated over 1,000 years of being exactly the kind of place that things hid inside. He was here. He was patient. And the thing under Quirrell's turban, reaching out with its blind searching attention, was going to find out, sooner rather than later, exactly what kind of patience it was dealing with. Chapter 5, The Weight of the Feather. The dog was the first indication that Dumbledore was serious about the stone. Harry found this out on a Sunday in October, when Ron and Hermione came back from the third-floor corridor looking like people who had survived something they hadn't expected to survive, speaking over each other with the overlapping urgency of shared crisis. A dog, Ron said. A three-headed dog, Hermione corrected. Which is a Cerberus variant, though the Greek tradition places them at the boundary of the underworld rather than, it nearly ate us, Ron said. We opened the door, Hermione said, in the tone of someone distributing blame accurately. You opened the door. We were lost, there was a trapdoor under it, Ron said, pivoting back to Harry, who had been listening with the composed attention he gave to all incoming information. Under the dog. In the floor. Harry set down The Rise and Fall of the Dark Arts, which he'd been reading and which was more accurate than most things he'd found in the library, though the chapter on soul magic was dangerously incomplete. Did it see you? All three heads saw us, Ron said. But it didn't chase you out. We ran, Hermione said. Quite fast. Harry nodded. He'd known about the corridor since his second week, not because he'd gone in, but because Fluffy's presence registered in the soul sense as a specific kind of layered animal awareness, 3 independent but linked consciousness lights, alert and cycling in a repeating pattern. Not malicious. Purposeful. Doing exactly what it had been placed to do. He'd been curious about the trapdoor but had been content to leave it in his working file until it became relevant. It was becoming relevant. Someone's using the dog to protect something, Harry said. The stone, Hermione said immediately, with the look of someone who had already worked this out and was relieved to have it confirmed. The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel, I found a reference in alchemy and its applications. Dumbledore is connected to Flamel, and there was something removed from a high-security Gringotts vault in July, Vault 713, Harry said. Hermione stopped. How did you know about the vault? Gringotts mentioned it. When I was there in July. He looked at her levelly. You've been doing excellent research, Hermione. She had the expression of someone who appreciated the recognition and was also irritated by it, because she'd wanted to be the one presenting new information rather than confirming what was already known. It was a specific and endearing frustration. What I don't understand, she said, recovering, is why it's here. Why hide the most powerful magical object in Europe in a school? Because of what the school contains, Harry said. Dumbledore. The combined magical signatures of 500 students. The wards, Hogwarts's wards are layered over 1,000 years of accumulated intent. It's not a perfect hiding place, but it's a complicated one. Whoever wants the stone has to get through all of that. He paused. The issue isn't the hiding. The issue is that whoever wants the stone is already in the school. Ron and Hermione both looked at him. Quirrell, Ron said slowly. Yes, Harry said. But he's our teacher, Hermione said, and then immediately looked annoyed at herself for saying it. He's also hosting something that is not Quirrell, Harry said. I've known since the first day. He looked at them both, and made a decision that was less a weighing and more an acknowledgement of the obvious, these two were going to be involved regardless. Ron had Weasley loyalty, which was geological in its persistence, and Hermione had Hermione curiosity, which was if anything more powerful. Keeping them uninformed would not keep them out. It would simply keep them unprepared. What I'm about to tell you is not comfortable, he said. But you should know it, because you're involved now whether or not you chose to be. He told them about the Horcruxes. Not everything, not the shard in his own scar, not yet, that was a more complicated conversation, but the structure of it. What a Horcrux was. What Voldemort had done. How many? What it meant for the soul balance of the living world that these fragments persisted outside the river's reach. When he finished, the common room fire crackled and the silence had weight. He split his soul, Hermione said. Her voice was completely flat, the voice she used when she was containing a large reaction behind the dam of analytical language. Multiple times. Yes. That's the damage to the self that would cause, she shook her head. What's left of him can't be, it barely is, Harry said. What came back and attached itself to Quirrell is less a person than the echo of one. Will and fear and nothing else. Ron had gone very quiet. He was looking at Harry with the direct, unvarnished attention he saved for things that actually mattered to him. "You said you've known since the first day," he said. "About Quirrell. That's 2 months ago. A beat. Why haven't you done anything yet?" "Because doing something imprecisely is worse than waiting," Harry said. "The stone isn't in danger yet, Quirrell hasn't gotten through the protections and isn't close. And what remains of Voldemort is weak enough that Quirrell is barely containing him. They're not ready to act." He looked at Ron steadily. "When they are, I'll know. And then we address it." "You've been watching," Ron said. "Yes. On purpose. Letting it get close." Ron turned this over in his way, the thinking that showed on his face because Ron had never learned to hide his process, and the process was good. Because if you shut it down too early, the rest of the Horcruxes are still out there. Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. "Exactly." Hermione was looking between them. "This is a strategy," she said. "You came to Hogwarts with a strategy." "I came to Hogwarts," Harry said, "to address an imbalance. The strategy follows from the nature of the imbalance." She was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet he could see her adjusting her model again, this time not of Harry specifically but of the situation, the full shape of it, the pieces she'd been assembling over 2 months slotting into a structure that was larger than she'd guessed. When she looked at him again, her expression had resolved into something clear and decided. "What do we do?" she said. November brought the troll. Harry had known it was in the castle before the announcement, had felt the creature's confused, aggressive soullight moving through the basement corridors in the early afternoon, a small, brutish consciousness radiating the animal panic of something that was well out of its territory. He'd been filing it as something to handle quietly until Quirrell's fainting announcement in the Great Hall broadcast the situation to the entire school. He found Hermione in the bathroom, already backed into a corner, the troll between her and the door with its club raised. The troll was 12 feet of dim purpose and structural menace. Hermione was white-faced and completely still in the way that was not calm but was the survival instinct that had overridden panic. Ron was in the doorway behind Harry, wand out with the shaking hands of someone choosing to hold their ground. The troll swung its club into the sink row to Harry's left. Stone shattered and tile flew. Harry didn't move. He looked at the troll with the reading attention and found, under the aggression and the disorientation, something he always found in animals, an absolute sincerity, a complete absence of the complicated moral layers that made reading people interesting and difficult. The troll was afraid and confused and lashing out from that afraid confusion. It wasn't wicked. It was lost. He stepped forward. "Harry," Ron's voice, tight with alarm. Harry raised one hand, not toward the troll, not a threat, just an acknowledgement of its presence, the specific quality of attention he developed for the large, powerful, frightened things in the Duat that needed to understand they had been seen before they could be managed. The troll's 3 remaining club swings stopped mid-preparation. The soul sense reached out gently. Not imposing. Just touching the edge of the troll's awareness with the specific quality of Harry's presence, the death scent, the threshold quality, the thing that made animals go still the way Gerald the spider had gone still on the first night in the Duat. The troll became very quiet. Then it sat down, heavily, on the bathroom floor. The club rested in its lap. It looked at Harry with the small, confused eyes of something that had encountered something its instincts had no category for. "Good," Harry said, quietly. Then, to Ron, "Can you get Professor McGonagall? It needs to go back to wherever it came from." Ron stared at him. At the sitting troll. Back at him. You just made it sit down." "Yes," Harry said. "By looking at it." "More or less." "By looking at it." "Ron," Harry said patiently. "Yeah. McGonagall." "Right." Ron went. Hermione had come away from the corner. She looked at the troll, which was sitting with the docile confusion of something that had forgotten what it was upset about. She looked at Harry. "That's not a spell," she said. No, he said. What is that? Theologically speaking, it's the death sense, Harry said. Animals feel it differently from people. To a troll, I feel like, the thing at the edge of the herd, the shadow that makes the old ones lie down. The predator that's older than predators. He tilted his head. It's not cruel. It just recognizes something in me. Hermione looked at him with the expression that was now specifically his, the cataloging and personal look, the one that was both scientific and genuinely moved. You keep doing things that I have no framework for, she said. And then explaining them in a way that is completely logical and that somehow makes it more remarkable, not less. I'm not trying to be remarkable, Harry said. I know, she said. That's the part one can't get used to. McGonagall arrived. She looked at the sitting troll, and then at Harry, and her face went through the process that Harry had come to recognize as McGonagall updating her files on Potter, version 12. She would update them again before the year was out. He suspected he would keep updating them for as long as she knew him. December arrived, and with it the smell of pine resin and cold stone and the specific excitement of people looking forward to going home, or in the Gryffindor's case, going home or staying and exploring a half-empty castle, both of which had their proponents. Harry was staying. He had no particular desire to spend Christmas in the Duat, which was always the Duat regardless of season, and he wanted the castle nearly to himself. Quieter. Easier to work. And on Christmas morning he found a package outside his dormitory door, wrapped in old linen, tied with a cord, without a card, that he recognized the texture of before he opened it. Inside was the cloak. He held it up. Invisibility cloaks were mortal magic solutions to a mortal magic problem, the desire to be unseen, which the living world had and the Duat did not bother with because in the Duat visibility was a function of the soul, not the body, and you could not hide your soul light. The cloak was extraordinary for its kind, though, he could feel the depth of the enchantment in it, hundreds of years of sustained, precisely layered magic, and underneath the magic something else, something that resonated faintly with the same ancient frequency as the things that predated conventional wizarding craft. He examined it carefully. Then he folded it and put it in his trunk. He did write a note, which he left on the windowsill for the first owl that came through. I have it. Thank you for returning it. We should speak properly after the holidays, I think you know that too. He addressed it to Dumbledore, added nothing else, and went to Christmas breakfast. The Mirror of Erist was in an empty classroom on the 4th floor, and Harry found it on New Year's Eve while he was exploring the half-empty castle with the methodical interest he brought to all new spaces. He stepped into the room and felt it before he saw it, a specific magical signature that was unlike anything else in the castle, dense and resonant and deeply, deeply old. Not Duat old. But old in the specific way of objects that had been worked with enormous intention over a very long time, that had absorbed the concentrated feeling of their purpose until the purpose had become the object. He stood in front of it and looked at himself. The mirror showed him what he desired. This was its function, he understood that immediately, had read enough about desire reflection magic to identify the mechanism without needing to test it. He looked into it prepared to see something, Anubis and Bastet, perhaps, his home, the dark river, the moving stars, the bowl of fruit that was always on the low shelf. What he saw was himself, as he was now, 11 years old, dark-haired, green-eyed, but older. Not much older. 14, 15, perhaps. Standing in the Duat, not the Hogwarts version or any version that was missing something, the actual Duat with all its vast and particular enormity around him. And in the mirror version, his forehead was clear. The scar was there but the wrongness behind it was not. His soul light, which he couldn't see in normal mirrors but could feel the outline of, was complete. Whole. Carrying no borrowed piece of someone else's fear. He stood there for a moment and let himself feel the specific ache of it, not loss, not despair, just the clean factual grief for something that was real and wanted and not yet. Then he turned and walked away. In the corridor, he took out his book of questions and wrote, "The mirror shows you what you want most. I want the shard gone. That means I want it enough to see it. Note, do not mistake the wanting for urgency. Urgency serves the shard, not the balance. He closed the book. Below it he opened to the back pages, where he kept the working list. The ring Horcrux. The locket. The cup. The diadem. The diary. The snake. And the shard. Each one a fragment of terror, refusing the river, refusing the scales, refusing everything that Harry had been raised to understand as the fundamental truth of existence. Each one an offense against Ma'at. One of them was here, attached to a frightened man, looking for a stone that would give its host the immortality it had been arranging for decades through more violent means. Before spring, he'd written in October. He could feel it accelerating now. The stone's protections were being tested, not with the brute force of someone who didn't understand them but with the patient, incremental probing of something that had been studying magic for 50 years and was willing to take its time. Quirrell was taking his time because the thing driving Quirrell was not Quirrell's urgency but its own, and its own urgency was shaped by centuries of paranoid preparation. It moved carefully because it had always moved carefully. Carelessness was how you ended up as a near-dead fragment attached to the back of someone's head. Harry watched it move and noted the acceleration. He would know the night it decided to act. He would be ready. The night came in June, with the smell of summer finally arriving in the Scottish Highlands and the Quidditch season freshly concluded. Harry had been on the Gryffindor Quidditch team since October, an invitation from Oliver Wood that had come with a desperation that suggested the team's need was significant. Harry had said yes because he found flying, genuinely and simply, wonderful. It was the mortal world equivalent of the transitional movement he'd practiced in the Duat, moving between states, trusting the passage, committing to the transition. On a broomstick, that meant genuine speed and genuine altitude and the satisfying directness of a sport that required total physical presence. He had caught the snitch in his mouth on his first game, which was theatrical, but the situation had required it and he had no objection to theater when theater was appropriate. The school year had built its own structures around him. Hermione had assembled a working understanding of what Harry was that was more complete than anything in the library and had filled 2 notebooks with it, which she guarded with the ferocity of someone who understood the value of the information. Ron had become the person Harry was most easy with, the one around whom the performance of normalcy dropped most fully, with whom he could eat dinner and argue about Quidditch and sit in silence without any of it carrying weight. These were not small things. The night Quirrell finally moved, Harry felt it at 11 o'clock, sitting at the dormitory window watching the grounds. The soul signature under the turban had changed. The slow, patient probing of the previous months was gone, replaced by a current of urgent, decisive movement, a plan in execution, not exploration. And underneath Quirrell's own fear, which had been building for weeks, the other presence was fully forward now, directing, the borrowed body a vehicle for its will. They'd been flushed. Harry understood immediately, someone had tipped it, made it believe the window for action was closing. He suspected Dumbledore. He was nearly certain it was Dumbledore. He got up, dressed, retrieved the invisibility cloak from his trunk. He'd used it twice, both times to verify sightlines rather than for concealment, and was at the dormitory door when Ron sat up in his bed. "Tonight?" Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. Ron was out of bed with the speed of someone who had been lightly sleeping in anticipation. "I'm coming." "You don't have to, I know," Ron said. He was pulling on shoes with the practical focus of someone who had made this decision already and was implementing it rather than deciding it. "Get Hermione." Hermione was awake too, sitting on her bed fully dressed, with the look of someone who had been waiting. She had a small bag over her shoulder. She looked at Harry and said, "I've been doing research on the protections in that corridor for 3 months. I think I know most of what's down there." Harry looked at them both. The warm, steady soul light of both of them, Ron's fierce uncomplicated loyalty, Hermione's fierce complicated love, both pointed in the same direction. He felt something that had no name in English but did in the language of the Duat, the specific warmth of standing with people who have chosen, genuinely and freely, to stand with you. "Come on, then," he said. The three-headed dog was already moved aside when they reached the trapdoor, by someone, ahead of them. Harry went through first without discussion. The devil's snare was immediate, vines reaching with the aggressive hospitality of plant life that had been given instructions and was following them enthusiastically. Hermione produced fire with the decisive authority of someone who had prepared for this specific contingency, and it retreated. Harry dropped through to the next chamber before the vines fully cleared, and Ron and Hermione followed. The winged keys were Ron's moment. He identified the pattern, the right key, with the chess player's instinct for reading a system's logic, and Hermione caught it with a spell of elegant economy. Through the next door. The chess set was enormous and violent, and the chess pieces had the soullight of objects that had been enchanted to purpose for so long they developed something adjacent to will. Ron looked at the board for 30 seconds in complete silence, then walked to the knight's square and took command of it. Harry watched him play and understood, again, what Ron was. Not a powerful soul in the death sense of the word, not carrying any divine weight, but a person whose essential quality was real and rare, whose judgment in his own domain was absolute. Ron won in 4 moves and took a piece to the shoulder doing it. He was standing, barely, and Harry crossed to him while Hermione hovered with anxious energy. "Go," Ron said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Hermione said. "I'm upright," Ron said, in the tone of someone defining fine pragmatically. "Harry, go. You know what you're walking into." Harry looked at him. The soul light was steady, hurt but not endangered, the warmth of it unwavering. "I know," Harry said. "We'll be right here," Hermione said. Her voice was controlled in the way it got when she was managing something large. "Come back." Harry walked through the door. The last room held the mirror of Ariste, and Professor Quirrell, and everything else that the year had been building toward. Quirrell had his back to Harry when Harry entered, standing before the mirror with his hands slightly raised, reading it. Whatever he was seeing was not cooperating, the mirror's logic required desire, and what was driving Quirrell was not desire but compulsion, which the mirror apparently recognized as a different thing entirely. Harry stood in the doorway and felt the full weight of the room. The mirror's resonance. Quirrell's fear, elevated now to a pitch that was essentially continuous. And the presence under the turban, fully forward, now that they were in the final room, the pretense dropped, the thing that had been using Quirrell like a glove for months allowing itself to be what it was. It felt the same as the shard in Harry's scar and was recognizably the same source, but more. More pieces, more will, more of the coiling desperate refusal that Harry had felt his entire life pressing against the container of his own soul. Voldemort felt Harry arrive. There was a quality to the air when that recognition happened, the specific charge of 2 things that had been connected since before Harry could remember finding each other across a room. Quirrell turned around. "I wondered," Quirrell said, and his voice had changed, not the stutter, not the performance, his own voice but stripped of the layer that Quirrell used to seem less than he was. Underneath the costume, the man was intelligent and desperate and deeply, wretchedly unhappy. "I wondered if you'd come. You've been moving toward this since September," Harry said. He walked into the room, unhurried, and stopped 10 feet from Quirrell and the mirror. "I've been watching." "Watching," Quirrell said, with a tone that was not quite his own, that had the edge of something else in it. "The boy who watches from a distance. The boy raised in the dark." "The Duat isn't dark," Harry said. "It's lit from within. The light doesn't come from a visible source, which confuses people who've never been there." He looked at Quirrell directly, at the man, not at what was on him. "Professor Quirrell. Are you in there?" A flicker. Behind the eyes that were not entirely Quirrell's own anymore, something moved. Something that remembered what it had been before it made the bargain. "Don't," said the thing under the turban, and Quirrell's face went flat again. "I'm not talking to you yet," Harry said. The presence pushed forward, Harry felt it like a hand against a window, the shard in his scar resonating with it, a low harmonic of recognition. The same creator. The same fear. The same unending, consuming terror of the river. He felt it reach toward him the way he'd felt it reach in the defense classroom in September, seeking the resonance of its own peace, the shard behind his forehead. Harry let it find what it was looking for. And what it found was Harry. Not the shard was contained, as it had always been, held quiet by 7 years of practice, but Harry, fully present, the death sense fully open, the threshold quality fully available, standing in the room like a doorway. The presence recoiled. It had been expecting the shard to respond, expecting the piece of itself it had been sensing all year to be available, to resonate, to give it something to work with. Instead it had found the equivalent of reaching through a window and finding a hand already there, holding the frame. "What are you?" Quirrell said, and now it was hard to tell whose voice it was. "Harry Potter," Harry said. Still. He looked at the mirror. "You need the stone and you can't get it from the mirror because the mirror gives it only to someone who wants it but won't use it. That's the enchantment's logic. You can't want something without the intention to use it, your whole existence is organized around using it. The mirror can tell the difference." He looked back at Quirrell. "I could get it from the mirror." A stillness. Then get it." "No," Harry said. The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Not the Duat cold, the honest deep cold of the river. The cold of something that had made itself into a weapon of raw will and was pointing that will at a target. "You will, I won't," Harry said, and his voice was exactly what it always was. Level. Clear. Carrying the resonant quality of someone who had learned to speak in the Hall of Two Truths. "You can't make me. You know that. You felt what I am when you reached for the shard just now. You know what you're dealing with." Quirrell moved, fast, trained despite everything, drawing on the magical ability that had made him worth using in the first place, and the spell that came off his wand was a killing curse variant, dark and cutting. Harry stepped aside. Not dramatically. Just, sideways, with the trained ease of years of Bastet's courtyard, the body that didn't flinch, and the spell took a piece of stone from the wall behind him. "Interesting," Harry said. He raised his hand, not with a wand, he'd bought one at Ollivander's because the school required it, and used it in class because the classes were built around it, but here, in this room, with the mirror of Eriste and the last fragment of Voldemort and everything that had been building toward this moment, a wand was not the appropriate tool. He reached for what Anubis had been teaching him since he was old enough to hold the concept, the true magic, the older magic, the one that ran along the channels of death and transition and the fundamental structure of what existed and what didn't. The Horcrux under the turban screamed. It was not a physical sound. It was a soul sound, the specific frequency of something that had refused the river for 30 years suddenly feeling the pull of it, the vast patient gravity of the dark water making itself known in the presence of someone who was made of it. Quirrell's hands went to his head. His face was 3 separate things at once, the man he'd been, the fear that had replaced him, and the thing he'd been hosting, all competing for the same face and none of them winning. "This is not a fight," Harry said. He walked forward. His voice had dropped to the register it took on in serious moments, not theatrical, not performed, but carrying the weight of its own truth. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here because the scales are out of balance and this is one of the places where the imbalance lives." He stopped 4 feet from Quirrell. "The piece of him that you're carrying, it doesn't belong here. It doesn't belong in the living world. It belongs where all soul fragments belong." He met Quirrell's fractured gaze. "You know that. Part of you has known that since you made the bargain." Quirrell was shaking. The presence under the turban was pushing forward with the desperate strength of something in genuine danger, not the testing probe of the classroom, not the patient assessment of the school year, but the full force of a will that had been fighting death for 50 years. It was a formidable will. Harry could feel the weight of it, the sheer accumulated force of decades of refusal, the intensity of the fear driving it. It was also, against what Harry was, completely insufficient. He pressed the death sense forward, gently, with the same quality he used on the large frightened things in the Duat, the same truthful attention, and let the presence feel what he carried. Not threat. Not attack. Just, the river is there. The river is always there. Everything that persists outside its banks persists in violation of something fundamental, and that violation has a cost, and the cost has been paid by everyone who came close to you and by yourself most of all, and the river is there. The presence contracted. Fought. Screamed in the soul frequency again. Quirrell collapsed. Harry caught him, reflexively, because a man falling is a man falling regardless of what he was carrying, and lowered him to the floor. He looked at Quirrell's face, which was fully Quirrell's now, the presence having retreated to its minimum form, coiled tight against the back of his skull in the specific contracted shape of something that understood it had lost this round. Is he going to be? Quirrell tried to say something. His voice was barely there. His soul light was damaged in the way that soul lights went when they'd been hosting something destructive for too long, worn thin at the edges, but it was there. It was still there. You're going to be alive, Harry said. I can't undo what's been done to you. But the presence is contracted, it's minimized. It won't be able to direct you. Not anymore. He looked at Quirrell's face. You need a healer. And you need to tell the truth about what you did and why. Not to me. To the people who deal with this in the mortal world. He paused. Will you? Quirrell looked at him from the floor. A man looking up at something he'd been fearing all year and finding it was not what he'd feared at all. What are you? He said, very quietly. I told you, Harry said. Harry Potter. You told me a name, Quirrell said. What are you? Harry looked down at him and thought about how to answer that, the honest answer, the accurate one, not the defensive deflection or the impressive version but the true one. I'm someone who was raised to understand what death is, he said. And what it isn't. And the difference matters. He stood. Stay here. Don't touch the mirror. He walked to the mirror of Erist and stood before it. In its surface, he saw himself, older, clear forehead, standing in the Duat with the shard finally gone. The same image as January. He looked at it for a moment and then looked into it properly, not at the image but at the stone, which the mirror had been holding in its enchanted logic since Dumbledore had set it there. He thought about the mirror's enchantment, the cloak, the stone, the wand, the hallows, the things that played at the edges of death's dominion. I want the stone, he thought. And I won't use it. He was the only person in the world for whom that was simply, straightforwardly true. The stone appeared in his pocket. He held it. Felt its weight, the warmth of it, the extraordinary concentrated life magic worked into the philosopher's red stone, the product of Flamel's centuries of understanding. It was beautiful in the way that very old, very powerful things were beautiful, carrying the evidence of vast work and vast time. He walked back to Quirrell, crouched, and pressed 2 fingers against the man's temple. He did not remove the presence. He was not ready for that, not yet, the preparation wasn't complete, but he compressed it further, into the smallest form it could take, and built a barrier around it from the same material as the containment around his scar. The same technique. The same origin. Stay, he said to it, not in English, in the language the Duat used for things that needed absolute clarity. Wait. The presence stilled. Quirrell breathed normally for the first time in months. Then Dumbledore arrived. He came through the door with the specific quality of someone who had been moving quickly and stopped himself from bursting through, choosing to enter with deliberate calm. His eyes went to Harry standing in the middle of the room, to the stone visible in Harry's open hand, to Quirrell lying on the floor alive and breathing, to the mirror, and then back to Harry. He said nothing for a long moment. Harry held out the stone. I believe this is yours, he said. Or Flamel's. Dumbledore crossed the room and took it with both hands, with the careful reverence of someone receiving something whose value they understood completely. He turned it once, then looked at Harry over the half-moon glasses. The blue eyes were doing complex things. He's alive, Harry said. The presence is contained. He needs a healer immediately. A beat. The presence is not fully gone, I couldn't do that here, without preparation, without risking the fragmentation affecting the other anchors. But it's compressed. He won't be directed by it again. He may be able to tell you things. Dumbledore looked at Quirrell for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. How did you compress it? The same way the shard in my scar is compressed, Harry said. I've been maintaining that containment for 7 years. The technique is well practiced. Something moved in Dumbledore's face. The shard, he said. You know about the shard. I've known since I was 8, Harry said. Anubis identified it when I was 4. He paused. I also know about all of the others. Their locations, their general states. I'm working toward them. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I am not working toward them as the fulfillment of a prophecy. I am working toward them because they are a moral imbalance and I am the one equipped to address it. I want to be clear about that distinction. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, long moment. The chess player's intelligence working behind those blue eyes, running through the implications of the board as it actually was rather than as it had been imagined. He set the stone carefully in his breast pocket. You are not what I expected, he said, for the 3rd time. No, Harry said. I know. I had plans, Dumbledore said, and there was something in the word that was not quite an apology but occupied its territory. Plans that were built on a version of you that had grown up in a cupboard, Harry said, without cruelty. That had been shaped by isolation and the particular wound of deliberate unkindness. That needed guidance and a structure to believe in. He looked at the old man across the mirror of Ariste and the unconscious man on the floor and the vast peculiarity of everything that this room contained. I understand why those plans seemed correct. Given what you knew. A pause. They would have been the wrong plans. Dumbledore was quiet. Something settled in his expression, not defeat, not quite, but the kind of resolution that comes after the fighting portion of the resistance is done, when a thing is understood deeply enough that opposing it feels beside the point. No, he said, finally. I think perhaps they would have been. Harry walked to the door. He stopped, turned back. The other Horcruxes, he said. The diary, it's dangerous and it's going to be deployed in this school if we don't address it. I need to know what you know about who has it. He paused. If we work together, it will go faster. I don't need direction. I need information. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Then, with the careful deliberation of a man making a decision that contradicts several years of entrenched strategy, I will tell you what I know. Good, Harry said. He walked out. In the corridor, Ron and Hermione were waiting at the base of the stairs, and Hermione actually grabbed his arm when he appeared, which was unusual for Hermione, who was not physically demonstrative unless she was alarmed. You're alive, she said. Yes, Harry said. Is it contained? Harry said. Not finished. But contained. He looked at them both, the warmth of them, steady as the fire in the Gryffindor common room. It went well. Bloody hell, Ron said, which covered a lot of ground. They walked up from the dungeons together, through the sleeping castle, through corridors that felt different at this hour, bigger, quieter, holding their stone patience around the small hot fact of 3 11-year-olds walking through them in the small hours of the morning, one of them carrying the residue of a confrontation with the fragmented soul of the darkest wizard in a century. Harry looked at the torchlit walls as they walked. He thought about the shard in his scar, compressed and waiting. He thought about the diary somewhere in a Death Eater's possessions, waiting to be used. He thought about the ring, and the locket, and the cup, and the diadem, all of them scattered through the mortal world like wrong notes in a song that wanted to resolve. He thought about the mirror's image. Clear forehead. Whole. Not yet. But the year had moved the balance. The stone was safe. Quirrell was alive and the presence in him was compressed to silence. Dumbledore had set aside his script. The scales had shifted. It was enough, for now. Progress was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a degree of correction, a small adjustment of the weights, the patient work of moving something vast and wrong incrementally toward right. He breathed in the castle's cold stone air and walked up toward the common room where the fire would still be warm. Chapter 6. What the Scales Remember. The hospital wing smelled of dittany and something floral that was trying very hard to be comforting and mostly succeeding. Harry sat in the chair beside Quirrell's bed because nobody had told him to leave and nobody had thought to, which was its own kind of permission. Madame Pomfrey had descended on Quirrell with the focused energy of someone who took personal offense at damage to the human body and was going to correct it through sheer professional will. She had also, at one point, looked at Harry sitting in the chair and opened her mouth to say something about visiting hours, and then looked at his face and decided the visiting hours conversation could wait. Quirrell was unconscious. His color was better than it had been on the dungeon floor. The healer work was doing what it was supposed to do, the physical damage being addressed competently. But Harry could see the soul light around him clearly in the hospital wing's quiet, and what he saw was what he'd expected, a soul that had been hosting something corrosive for too long, worn at the edges, thin in places, but fundamentally intact. Holding. Quirrell was not, as people had been nervously suggesting in the corridors outside, going to die. The presence Harry had compressed was still compressed. He could feel it at a distance, very faint, a dim coil of trapped will behind the barrier he'd built over Quirrell's skull in the dungeon. It was not comfortable in there. It was also not going anywhere. He checked the compression twice, satisfied himself with it, and was standing to leave when Quirrell's eyes opened. Not both at once, the left one first, struggling, then the right. He lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling with the specific blankness of someone taking inventory. Then he said, very quietly, "It's quiet." "Yes," Harry said. Quirrell turned his head on the pillow. His eyes found Harry and held. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently found enough of it to keep looking. "You could feel it," he said. "This whole year. You could feel it in me." "From the first day," Harry said. He sat back down. "Defense against the dark arts. I felt it when I walked into your classroom." "Why didn't you?" Quirrell stopped. The obvious completion of that sentence was "why didn't you do something," and the obvious answer was sitting in the word strategy, which Quirrell was apparently intelligent enough to arrive at on his own. "You were waiting," he said. "For the right moment." "Yes." Quirrell was quiet for a while. Outside the hospital wing windows, the Scottish morning was grey and cool, the ground still holding the pre-breakfast stillness that Harry had come to like over the year, the castle at its most honest, before the day's performance began. "I went to Albania," Quirrell said. "I told people I was going to study dark magic in the field. Study it academically. I thought," he paused. "I thought that was true, at first. I thought I was just curious. I thought I could look at it and remain separate from it." He looked at the ceiling. "He found me in a forest. What was left of him? He'd been, waiting. For something he could use. A beat. He's very patient." "I know," Harry said. "But you're more patient," Quirrell said. He said it simply, factually, without the reverence or the fear that usually accompanied people's assessments of Harry's particular qualities. He said it like a man who had spent a year watching from inside a cage and had made accurate observations. "He knew you were here. He could feel the piece of him, the one in your," he looked at Harry's forehead. "He kept saying you'd be easy. That the piece in you was leverage. That he could pull it." A pause. "He couldn't, could he?" "No," Harry said. He was furious about that. All year. Quirrell's mouth moved in something that might, in different circumstances, have been a laugh. "Every time you came into the classroom. He'd go very still, in the way he did when something wasn't going how he'd expected. And then he'd tell me you were just a boy. Just a child." He looked at Harry. "You weren't." "I'm 11, Harry said. "You know what I mean." He did. He nodded. Quirrell looked at the ceiling again. What happens to me now? Harry considered the honest answer, which was the only kind he gave. The Ministry will want to speak with you. Dumbledore will want to speak with you. What you tell them and how you tell it will shape what comes next significantly. He paused. The presence in you is compressed. It's stable. I've built the same kind of container around it that I use for the shard in my own scar. It won't be able to direct you, speak through you, or harm you. But it's not destroyed. I can't destroy it here. Not yet. Quirrell absorbed this. It's still in me. A remnant. Minimal. Contained. Harry met his gaze steadily. I'm not going to apologize for that. I couldn't safely remove it without preparation, and the safe version mattered more than the fast version. But you should know it's there, and know that it's not in control. Will you? Quirrell started. Then he stopped, as if catching himself asking something he didn't have the right to ask. When it's time, Harry said, I'll deal with all of them. Including the fragment in you. He stood. But you need to be honest with the people coming to speak with you. Not because honesty is always comfortable, but because the truth is what actually happened, and the truth is what determines what comes next. Don't dress it up. He looked at Quirrell for a moment. You were frightened, and you made a choice from that fear, and the choice cost you a year of yourself and very nearly more. That's what happened. That's enough. Quirrell looked at him. Something in the worn, thin soullight around him shifted slightly, not better, not recovered, not healed, but oriented. Pointing somewhere. How old did you say you are? 11, Harry said again. Right, Quirrell said. He turned back to the ceiling. Right. Harry left him to Madame Pomfrey, who reappeared from behind her screen with the expression of someone who had many questions and the professional discipline not to ask them, and walked out into the castle's morning. The story had broken by breakfast. Not fully, not in the complete, detailed, accurate version, but enough. Hogwarts ran on information the way it ran on magic, through channels and systems that predated any formal infrastructure, and by the time Harry walked into the Great Hall at 7:30, the news was already halfway around the school in its various incomplete forms. He heard them as he walked. Something happened in the dungeons, Quirrell collapsed, they're saying he's in the hospital wing, Potter was involved, obviously, someone said they saw him coming up from, did you hear he actually went down there and he sat down at the Gryffindor table next to Ron, who had a plate of toast and the focused composure of someone who had slept 3 hours and made peace with it, and across from Hermione, who had her hands wrapped around a cup of tea and was watching the hall with the systematic attention she brought to all data-gathering situations. It's spreading fast, she said. Yes, Harry said. He took a piece of toast. 3 different versions already, Ron said, with a certain impressed quality. In one of them you killed Quirrell and stole the stone. In another one Quirrell turned out to be you-know-who in a complete disguise. The third one is closest to true but has you doing a lot more dramatic spell work than actually. The truth will be accurate enough eventually, Harry said. When you say that in that voice, Ron said, I always think you mean something more complicated than it sounds. I usually do, Harry said. Hermione was still watching the hall. Her eyes moved along the Slytherin table with the expression of someone cross-referencing. Malfoy is looking at you, she said. Harry looked. Draco was looking, not with the casual social attention of someone monitoring the room, but with the specific focused attention of someone who had heard something that meant something to him personally. When he caught Harry's eyes, he didn't look away. Harry nodded once, slight. An acknowledgement. Draco looked down at his breakfast. Something in his posture had changed, though Harry couldn't tell from this distance whether it was better or worse. He filed it and moved on. Professor McGonagall appeared at his shoulder. She did not sit, she stood with her hands clasped behind her back and said, in a low voice that carried about 3 feet and no further, the headmaster wishes to see you after breakfast. In his office. I know, Harry said. McGonagall paused. He was going to ask, Harry said. After last night. She looked at him for a long moment. Is there anything that happens in this school, she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing each word, that you do not know is coming? Occasionally, Harry said. I was surprised by the specifics of the chess set. You were surprised by she stopped. Collected herself. Put both hands very precisely on the back of the bench. 10 o'clock, she said. The headmaster's office. She walked away. She's fond of you, Hermione said, watching her go. I know, Harry said. She'd be horrified to know how obviously it shows, Hermione said. I know that too, Harry said. Ron ate his toast. What's in Dumbledore's office? Conversation, Harry said. We need to have a real one. We've been working around each other all year. He looked at his own plate. It's time to work together instead. The stone gargoyle moved aside for him before he said the password, which he took as either Dumbledore's instruction or the gargoyle's own assessment of the situation, and the spiral staircase carried him up to the office door. He knocked. Come in, Harry, Dumbledore said. The office was full of the accumulated personality of decades, instruments Harry couldn't name spinning in corners, portraits of previous headmasters in various states of wakefulness, a fireplace that was currently dark, the sorting hat on its shelf looking like it was pretending to be asleep and wasn't entirely convincing about it. Dumbledore was behind his desk with Fawkes on the perch beside him, and the Phoenix looked at Harry with the bright, ancient attention of a creature that was older than the school and knew considerably more than it generally let on. It made a low sound, not its full song, just a note, resonant and warm. Harry looked at Fawkes for a moment. The soul light of the Phoenix was extraordinary, not like any other living thing he'd read, not the simple warmth of animals or the complex layering of humans, but something that cycled, that contained its own ending and renewal as a permanent condition, that carried death and rebirth as a continuous experience rather than a single event. You understand each other, Dumbledore said, watching Harry look at Fawkes. More than most things here, yes, Harry said. He sat down. You wanted to talk. Several conversations at once, I suspect, Dumbledore said. He had the quality this morning of someone who had slept less than usual and thought considerably more than usual, and whose thinking had arrived somewhere he was still getting accustomed to. You said last night that you want information, not direction. Yes. And I said I would provide it. He pressed his fingers together over the desk. I find myself, this is unusual for me, Harry, and I say so not to alarm you but because I believe directness serves us better now, I find myself genuinely uncertain how to structure this conversation. I have spent several years preparing to guide a boy I had a specific understanding of. You are not that boy. No, Harry said. The boy I was preparing for would have needed, has needed, careful management of information. Protection from certain truths until he was ready. A gradual orientation to his significance and his purpose. He paused. That entire framework assumes a version of you that does not correspond to what is sitting across from me. It assumed I'd been left where you left me, Harry said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. Dumbledore's hand stilled. Yes, he said. It did. He looked at Harry over the half-moon glasses. You know I placed you with your aunt. Yes. You know why. The blood wards, Harry said. Lily Potter's sacrifice created a protection anchored in blood. Petunia Dursley sharing that blood created a location where the protection could be sustained. You placed me there to maintain the wards. He met Dumbledore's gaze. It was a strategically sound decision. Something in Dumbledore's face tensed slightly, preparing for the next part. It was also a decision that took into account the wards and the strategy, Harry said, and did not sufficiently account for whether the location was safe. Whether the people there would, he stopped. He examined his own feeling about it, the careful professional grief he developed, the Duat-trained understanding that anger in proportion was justice and anger out of proportion was something else. Anubis went back, he said. After he took me. He spoke to Petunia. He told her I was well and that no attempt to retrieve me would succeed. She didn't fight it. He paused. She was not a person constructed to care for a child she associated with a sister she'd spent her adult life resenting. Placing me there, whatever the strategic logic, was placing me with someone constitutionally unsuited to the role. Dumbledore was quiet. Not the silence of someone formulating a defense. The silence of someone listening to an accounting they have avoided for a long time. I don't tell you this, Harry said, because I want an apology. I tell you because it's true, and because if we're going to work together properly, you need to understand that I can see the difference between decisions made from strategy and decisions made from care, and that sometimes those are the same decision and sometimes they aren't. I need to know which one I'm getting. Dumbledore looked at him across the desk. The blue eyes were doing something Harry had not seen them do in any of their previous encounters. The chess player's intelligence was there, yes, always present, but it was currently quieter than usual, pushed to the back by something simpler and more uncomfortable. Something that looked, in the soul light, very much like genuine reckoning. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said finally. What do you know? The diary is with Lucius Malfoy, Harry said. Probably in his home, possibly connected to a plan for this school specifically. He'll want to use it. The purpose of a Horcrux isn't just to be a soul anchor, it's to persist and to affect, and the diary does that directly. He watched Dumbledore's face. You know about the diary. I have suspicions about several of them, Dumbledore said. I have been gathering information for years, carefully, I have been reluctant to move against them without understanding the full picture, because the full picture includes me, Harry said. The soul shard in your scar, Dumbledore said. Yes. I understood from the beginning, from the night it happened, that the curse's failure was not clean. That something had gone wrong with the soul that cast it. I did not know, initially, what. Over time I came to understand. He looked at Harry directly. I was prepared to ask you to do something I had no right to ask any person to do. I had decided it was necessary. That the calculation required it. Die, Harry said. You were prepared to ask me to die. The word fell into the office's quiet and sat there. Dumbledore said nothing for a moment. Then, not immediately. Not at 11. But eventually, when the time came, yes. I believed the shard could only be destroyed by the death of the body it's in, Harry said. I know. I've known since I was 8. He leaned forward slightly. That's not how I'm going to handle it. When the other Horcruxes are destroyed and the anchors are gone and what remains of Voldemort is diminished to its irreducible minimum, then the shard can be extracted. Properly. By someone who understands soul work at the level it requires. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I am not going to die to fix this. That is not the correct solution. It's the solution that presents itself when you don't have access to the right tools, and I have access to the right tools. Dumbledore looked at him. Whatever he was feeling was complex and layered, and Harry could see it in the soul light moving behind those blue eyes, relief and shame and something that was recalibrating rapidly through several stages at once. You're certain, Dumbledore said. About the extraction. Anubis is certain, Harry said. Which is the more relevant certainty? Dumbledore breathed out. It was not a dramatic breath. It was the breath of someone releasing something they had been holding for a decade, very quietly, in the way that people who are accustomed to bearing weight release it, gradually, carefully, so as not to show how heavy it was. What do you need from me? He said. And it was the first time he'd asked that question in that direction. Harry understood. Every previous version of this conversation, in Dumbledore's planning, in his extensive strategizing, had flowed the other way. What does Harry need to be told? What does Harry need to understand? What does Harry need to become? Not, what does Harry need from me? Information, Harry said again. Everything you know about each remaining Horcrux. Their likely locations, any confirmed sightings, any magical signatures you've detected. He paused. And I need you to not preemptively act on them without telling me first. Some of them require specific handling. The ring, particularly, there's a curse on it that goes beyond the Horcrux itself, and if you try to destroy it with standard magic, I'll be very careful, Dumbledore said, and the care with which he said it suggested he had already been considering the ring. Careful isn't enough for the ring, Harry said flatly. When it comes to the ring, wait. Tell me first. I'm not making a demand, I'm telling you that the wrong approach there will be catastrophic and the right approach requires what I know rather than what standard curse-breaking knows. Dumbledore looked at him. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and produced a small pensieve and a notebook, old, thickly filled, and set them both on the desk between them. Everything I have, he said. The memories, the notes, the theories. A beat. I imagine you'll identify things I missed. Probably, Harry said. And you'll identify things I don't have context for. We both have different parts of this. He looked at the pensieve. That's how it should work. Fawkes sang a single note, brief and golden, from his perch. Neither of them looked at him, but Harry felt the warmth of it settle in the room like something being confirmed. The owls came 3 days later. Not the magical world's newspapers, they came too, eventually, the Daily Prophet running a front-page story with a photograph of the school and a headline about you-know-who's return attempt and a great deal of speculation about the student involved, which managed to be simultaneously dramatic and factually sparse. What Harry noticed first was the private correspondence. 15 owls, in the space of one morning. Some from ministry officials, requests for statements, inquiries about the nature of the defensive techniques employed, one from the Department of Mysteries that was so carefully worded in its curiosity that it was essentially a love letter to indirection. One from a journalist named Rita Skeeter, which Harry read once and then used as kindling for the dormitory fireplace, which felt appropriate. Several from wizarding families he'd never heard of, some offering congratulations and some asking questions and 2 offering things in the tone of people who thought something was for sale. One letter had no return address and no signature. It read, in a neat hand, "Well done. Don't get comfortable." He read it twice, set it on his nightstand, and thought about the rat in Ron's pocket. He was going to need to deal with Scabbers soon. Ron came in while Harry was looking at the letter pile and sat on his own bed and looked at the owls being sorted on Harry's bed with the expression of a man encountering a weather event. Is this going to be normal now? Probably, Harry said. The prophet called you the boy who lived again, Ron said. There's a whole section about your destiny and your lightning scar. I think they're printing the same article they wrote in 1981. They probably are, Harry said. How do you feel about it? Harry considered this properly, the way Ron always expected him to, not the quick deflective answer but the actual answer. I don't feel like the person they're describing, he said. The prophet's Harry Potter is someone who survived something as a baby and has been waiting ever since for his destiny to catch up with him. He looked at the pile of letters. That's not what happened. I survived something as a baby, and then I spent 7 years learning to understand it, and now I'm doing the work. The prophet doesn't have a category for that. The wizarding world doesn't have a category for you, Ron said. No, Harry said. Not yet. Ron was quiet for a moment. My mum wants to meet you, he said. She's heard some things, obviously, and she wrote me and asked if you had plans for the summer and, he stopped, in the way Ron stopped when something mattered more than his usual ease. You don't have to. Obviously. If you're going back to, I'd like to, Harry said. Meet your family. Ron's face did something that it did when relief arrived in a form he hadn't expected. Yeah, he said. Yes, Harry said. He thought about the burrow, he'd heard enough about it through the year to have a picture of it, tall, impractical, full of people who loved each other at considerable volume. He thought about what that was going to feel like, the soul sense in a house like that. Will there be a lot of them? 7 children, Ron said. Well, 6 who are actually going to be there, Bill and Charlie are mostly abroad, and Percy will be very Percy about everything, but Fred and George will probably try to test something on you within the first 5 minutes, and Ginny," Harry said. Ron looked at him. "She wants to meet you. She's mentioned you a few times. She's a year below, she'll start in September." "She'll be fine," Harry said, with the simple certainty he got sometimes, not from the deep reading but from the nearer one, the assessment of patterns. "She's going to be more than fine, actually." Ron looked at him with the slightly unsettled acceptance he'd developed as his primary response to Harry knowing things. "Right," he said. "Yeah. She's got good instincts." The last week of term had its own rhythm, exams completed, trunks packed, the castle releasing its students the way it always did, with the specific quality of a place that did not experience loss but did experience change. Hermione sat with Harry in the library on the second-to-last evening and talked for 2 hours, which was the longest and most honest conversation they'd had yet. She talked about her parents, who were Muggle dentists and who she loved and who she sometimes felt she was growing away from in ways she didn't have language for. About the loneliness of being Hermione at her primary school, where her precision and her enthusiasm were not assets. About the first letter, the arrival of the magical world, the overwhelming relief of finding a place that had room for what she was. Harry listened the way Anubis had taught him to listen, fully, without the partial attention of someone preparing their response. He heard all of it. "Do you ever feel like you're two things at once?" Hermione said. "Like, I'm a Muggle-born, and I'm a witch, and sometimes those two things pull in opposite directions." "I'm mortal-born," Harry said, "and I'm something that doesn't have a clean category in any living tradition. I was raised by gods in the afterlife." He looked at her. "Yes. I feel like two things at once. I feel like every time I try to stand fully in one world, something in the other one pulls." He thought about it for a moment. "I've decided that's not a problem to solve. It's just what I am. The two things don't actually pull apart, they make each other more complete." Hermione looked at him. The loneliness stone in her soul light, the one she'd been carrying since childhood, was slightly lighter than it had been in September. Not gone. Not resolved. Just carried differently, shared some of its weight. "Is that why you ended up in Gryffindor?" she said. "Because you were going to make us more complete?" "The hat thought so," Harry said. "I thought it sounded reasonable." She smiled, the real one, the one that took over her whole face when she let it. "I've never had a friend who knew what they were doing," she said. "Everyone I've ever been friends with has been stumbling around as much as I was." She paused. "You're not stumbling." "I've had more practice," he said. "But I do stumble. I just do it in different directions than most people." "What's your stumbling direction?" He thought about it honestly. "People," he said. "I'm very good at reading souls. I'm less good at the ordinary texture of people. The way people are when they're not in crisis. The small talk and the humor and the," he gestured vaguely. "Ron has taught me more about that this year than 7 years in the Duat. The Duat doesn't have small talk." "I'm also bad at small talk," Hermione said. "I know," Harry said. "It's one of the reasons this conversation is easy." She laughed. Not the polite laugh, the real one. He liked both but the real one was better. On the last morning, Harry went to the hospital wing one more time. Quirrell was sitting up in his bed with the look of someone who had been through several conversations in the past week that had required a great deal of honesty, and who was tired but not broken. The ministry people had come and gone, Harry knew what they'd said, roughly, through channels that included the Sorting Hat's gossip function, which was prodigious. Quirrell had told the truth, or most of it, or at least enough of it that the truth could be reconstructed from the gaps. "They're not going to prosecute," Quirrell said, when Harry came in. "No," Harry said. "The evidence leans toward coercion. Voldemort doesn't ask, exactly." "He doesn't," Quirrell agreed. He looked at Harry. "I heard the students talking this week. About you. In the corridor outside, they don't think about the fact that sounds carry up here. He tilted his head. They're trying to understand what you are. Some of them think you're some kind of elemental. Some of them think you're a dark wizard who plays at being good. One of the Slytherins thinks you're secretly the reincarnation of someone ancient. He paused. None of them are quite right, are they? No, Harry said. What are you? He asked it again, not with the fear of the dungeon, not with the desperation of last week, just with the genuine curiosity of a man who had been a teacher once and still had the instinct. Harry sat down. He had thought about this question since Quirrell first asked it in the dungeon, and he had been turning over the honest answer. Not the deflective one. Not the name. The actual answer. I'm someone who understands death, he said. Not as an abstraction, not as a destination to be feared or a metaphor for loss. As a real thing, with structure and purpose and its own kind of justice. I grew up in the place where it happens. I know what it costs and what it offers and what it is. He looked at Quirrell steadily. And Voldemort, Tom Riddle, whatever you want to call what's left of him, his entire existence, every terrible choice he made, every person he destroyed, every piece of his own soul he tore away, all of it was organized around not understanding that. He paused. I'm the opposite of what he is. That's what I am. Quirrell was quiet for a while. Outside the window, the grounds were already busy with the movement of students and trunks and owls and the organized departure of a school year ending. He's afraid of you, Quirrell said. I know, Harry said. Not the way he's afraid of things that can defeat him, Quirrell said. Differently. Like you're something his fear doesn't have a word for. Harry thought about the dark river. The patient water. The cold that was not cruel, just true. Good, he said. The train back to London had the particular quality of an ending that was not quite an ending, the school year closing but the people in it carrying their year forward, the compartment full of Ron and Hermione and a chess set and a Transfiguration textbook and the ongoing argument about whether Hermione's arithmancy scheduling for next year was necessary, it was, or excessive, also true, and Harry sat at the window and watched Scotland turning into England and then into the outskirts of London, and thought about what was next. The diary was with Lucius Malfoy. The ring was in a house in Little Hangleton. The locket had passed through multiple hands since 1979 and was currently in a cave on the coast, inside a basin of terrible magic, which he found annoying because the approach was going to require specific preparation. The cup was in Gringotts, another vault, different number. The diadem was in Hogwarts itself, in a room full of centuries of accumulated hiding. The snake was not yet a Horcrux, that wouldn't happen until Voldemort had enough body to make the killing, which meant there was a window. He wrote in his book of questions, the window for the snake is open. How wide? Depends on how fast Voldemort can reconstitute. Current estimate, 2 to 3 years before he has sufficient form to act again on that scale. But he'll try to move faster if he has help. He thought about Lucius Malfoy and the diary. He thought about Draco. He looked up and across the compartment at Ron and Hermione, who had achieved their usual traveling equilibrium of comfortable argument, and thought about the rat in Ron's pocket with the old soulite and the pretending to be less texture. He needed to handle Scabbers before September. The rat was Peter Pettigrew. He'd worked it out over the spring, cross-referencing the soul signature with the notes on the Marauder's history that he'd found in A History of Hogwarts, volumes 3 to 4, and Pettigrew was the thread that led back to Voldemort's resurrection, and that thread needed cutting before it was pulled. He added it to the list. Compressed and patient and working through the structure of it. At King's Cross, the barrier opened back into the Muggle world, the smell of exhaust and noise, the flat light, the urgency, and Harry stood on the platform side with his trunk and his owl and his book of questions and looked at the ordinary world pressing in on all sides and felt, as he always did, the two things at once quality of it. The Duat in him and the world around him, the deep cold truth of one and the immediate warm urgency of the other. Ron was already scanning the crowd for the red hair cluster that meant his family. Hermione's parents were by the barrier, a neat, kind-looking couple who did not look magical in any observable way and who she went to with the particular careful love of someone managing the distance between worlds by walking it very carefully. And Harry stood with his trunk and looked at the crowd and felt it before he saw it. Two presences, distinct and unmistakable. One deep and still and carrying the cold of the river. One warm and immediate, bright-eyed, alert. Anubis was wearing the same human form as July, lean, dark, golden-eyed, impeccably dressed, standing with the unhurried patience of someone who exists outside the normal experience of waiting and therefore doesn't mind it at all. Bastet was beside him in the warm, particular form of a woman who could be in a crowd of thousands and still feel like the most present thing in it. Her amber eyes found Harry immediately, with the absolute focus of something that had been tracking his location at all times through a network of cooperative Scottish cats and simply waited for the physical confirmation of what it already knew. Harry walked to them. Not fast, he didn't run, it wasn't his way, but with the purposeful directness of someone closing a distance that had been too large. Bastet put her hands on his face when he reached her. Not dramatically. Just, cupped his face in both hands and looked at him, the complete examination of someone who loves something and needs to confirm it is whole. Her green eyes moved over his face, checking, reading, finding what she found. Good, she said, quietly. Just that. He put his arms around her and she put her arms around him, and the warmth of it, the hearth warmth, the protection warmth, the warmth of something that had decided 7 years ago that this was its person, was absolute. Anubis stood slightly to the side, holding Harry's trunk. It had floated to him from Harry's hand when Harry crossed the last 10 feet, without any apparent instruction, and he looked at Harry over Bastet's shoulder with those gold eyes that saw everything and missed nothing. Harry met them. The shard, Harry said, his voice slightly muffled. Still there, Anubis said. I know. But the year moved things. Yes, Anubis said. Considerably. There's more to do. There is always more to do, Anubis said, with the flat serenity of someone for whom this was simply the permanent condition of existence. That is not a problem. It is a description. Harry stepped back from Bastet, who let him go without reluctance but kept one hand on his shoulder for a moment longer, the way she did. He looked between them, his family, the divine and deeply specific family that had opened a cupboard door 7 years ago and changed everything about what happened next. Lucius Malfoy has the diary Horcrux, he said. I need to check on the ring situation before Dumbledore decides to act on it alone, which he's going to. I can feel his impatience from here. Peter Pettigrew is alive and living as a rat in the Weasley household, which is a problem with a timer on it. And Voldemort is going to try to reconstitute within the next few years if he has enough help. He paused. I want to go home first. For the summer. Bastet smiled, the sharp brilliant version. Obviously, she said. Susan has built an exceptional new web. Gerald? Harry said. Gerald retired 2 years ago, Bastet said, with the gravity the matter deserved. Mop took over his territory and is running it with what I would describe as aggressive competence. Good, Harry said. I want to see Mop's territory. Anubis had already turned toward the barrier. Not the official barrier, a different kind, the private kind, the one that opened between the immediate present and something deeper, older, the transition that Harry could feel at the edges of King's Cross Station like the river pressing gently against a wall. The Duat has been quiet, Anubis said. The soul flow is regular. The scales are balanced. A pause, and in the pause the weight of the thing he was going to say next. We missed you in the hall. Harry looked at him. Anubis said this the way he said all personal things, factually, without embellishment, with the complete authority of something that does not dress itself up. We missed you. A statement of truth, filed honestly, requiring no response beyond acknowledgement. I missed the hall, Harry said. I know, Anubis said. The barrier opened. Not with drama, it never did, the real transitions didn't announce themselves. Just a change in the quality of the air and the light, the flat London morning shifting at its edges to something older and wider, the smell of exhaust giving way to warm dry air and the distant resonance of natron and kiffy. Harry picked up his owl's cage. Behind him, King's Cross continued its ordinary business, the Muggle world moving on its urgent clock, the wizarding world pressing its secrets against the brick barriers, the invisible threshold between what was known and what was not yet known exactly where it had always been. In front of him, the Duat opened in its quiet, vast, unhurried way, carrying its dark river and moving stars and the distant sound of scales resetting. He stepped through. Not because he was done with the mortal world, there were Horcruxes to find, a diary to recover, a rat to confront, a rising darkness to dismantle piece by careful piece. Not because Hogwarts was finished with him or he with it, he'd be back in September, and the year ahead had its own weight and its own necessity. But because this was also home. This was the other half of what he was. The cold deep truth under the warm urgency of living, the patient river under the urgent surface, the scales that remembered everything. He stepped through, and the Duat received him the way it always had, completely, without condition, with the quality of something that had been waiting not with impatience but with the absolute certainty that he would return, because he always returned, because this was what he was, the boy who had crossed the threshold at 4 years old and found out what was on the other side and been shaped by it forever. Harry Potter. Haruank. 11 years old and something much older, something the wizarding world was only beginning to learn to see. He walked down toward the dark river. Mop's territory, it turned out, was extraordinary. The scales turn. The river waits. What is owed will be given. What is taken will return. The feather remembers everything it has weighed. The boy walks on.